Stargate Book presents Fasting Can Save Your Life by Herbert M. Shelton. Digitally narrated using the voice of Edward Herman. Discharge of liability. The information provided in this book is general in nature and for informational purposes only. Therefore, it is in no way a substitute for the advice of a physician, i.e., a person legally licensed to practice medicine, or, in specific cases, other health professionals, dentists, nurses, psychologists, pharmacists, veterinarians, physical therapists, etc. None of the individual contributors, system operators, developers, the publisher, or other parties connected with can be held responsible for the results or consequences of any use or attempted use of any of the published information. Fasting must be recognized as a fundamental and radical process, and is the most remote mode of care, because it is employed on the level of instinct and has been used since life appeared on Earth. Fasting is the method by which nature gets rid of diseased tissues, excess nutrients, accumulations of waste products, and toxins. Nothing else can eliminate all this as well as fasting does. It allows the process of renewal and drives away degenerative processes, resulting in a truly high standard of health. There are few pathological conditions that prolonged fasting cannot help. In many desperate conditions, it represents the only hope. Any reversible condition, and even many that are considered irreversible, can be overcome. Fasting is a natural process, not difficult or mysterious, and does not cause any real problems or dangers. When compared with the use of powerful drugs and surgical procedures, both of which are life-sustaining and always dangerous treatments, fasting is truly a moderate procedure. It is important that prolonged fasts be conducted properly under appropriate care. Even very short fasts cause better results when conducted under ideal conditions, including interruption and follow-up. Dr. Shelton, who has assisted about 100,000 fasters of people of all ages, groups, and conditions, certainly represents an authority in this field, and is certainly the man best suited to write such a volume. Author News. No one is more qualified to write a book on fasting than Herbert M. Shelton. He has led more fasts than any other man on earth and has been the leading authority in the field. For more than 50 years he ran his own institution, where people from all parts of the world and in all health conditions went to fast and to learn how to keep healthy. Born in 1895, Herbert M. Shelton has studied natural hygienistics since his high school years. Although he earned a degree in the hygienic disciplines, he can be considered self-taught. He discovered very early the errors and inconsistency of therapeutic systems and began to study on his own the ramifications of the idea that health can only be maintained by a healthy way of life. He was a tireless writer, author of numerous articles and more than 36 books. He was editor and columnist of the Hygienic Review, founded in 1939 with the aim of eliminating that fear and ignorance toward diseases that have deep roots in people's mentality and teaching them the way to health. Chapter 1. You and Fasting. Fasting means much more than simply not eating. It is a science and an art. It affects the general well-being of the body and the psychological and emotional aspects of life. Fasting, in the sense understood by us, means total abstinence for a defined period of time from food. The term is derived from the word fasten, which, in archaic English, meant firm or fixed. In other words, fasting is something to be carried out on a firm foundation and under controlled and well-fixed conditions. In religious terms, it can mean abstinence from certain types of foods in conjunction with specific days that are considered holy. But, however, in these cases it is partial abstinence and never total abstinence. There are people who during Lent have fasted while still managing to gain weight, and this is because they substituted forbidden foods with much fatter and richer ones. Those who believe that fasting is the equivalent of starving are completely wrong. Basically, there are two periods in the process of abstinence from food that we will deal with: the period of actual fasting and the period of starvation. As we study the phenomenon of abstinence, we will definitely clarify the differences between these two stages. It is necessary, however, to understand from the outset that the fasting stage continues for as long as the body can maintain itself by consuming the reserves stored in its tissues. Starvation begins when abstinence is prolonged beyond the limit of reserves. It must also be understood that there is a whole lot of loose terminology that throws smoke in the eyes of the reading public. For example, one often hears about water fasts. Technically, it is assumed that a person who undergoes a water fast completely renounces the consumption of that liquid. On the contrary, what is meant in loose terminology is a diet in which water is used exclusively. The same goes for the expressions juice fasting or plant extract fasting. Again, in these cases, what is meant is that one gives up all foods except fruit or plant extracts. The term partial fasting is used by those who limit what they consume to the maximum possible extent. The misuse of the word starvation, both in common parlance and scientific terminology, has caused much harm. The term comes from the Anglo-Saxon word steerfan, which means to die not only from lack of food, but also from freezing. This gave rise to the expression freezing to death. Indeed, starvation constitutes a deadly process. One cannot die of starvation in good health. One can fast for certain periods of time and consequently improve physical condition and restore good health. Beneficial effects can be achieved by abstaining from consuming food for long periods of time. When you realize that you are entering the second stage of abstaining from food, you should definitely stop fasting. I stated earlier that fasting is one of the aspects that form a new way of life that I will deal with in this book. It is not used only for the purpose of weight reduction. It can be, and certainly is, equally important when understood as part of the function of maintaining or restoring physical health. The sick or injured animal takes refuge in a hidden place where it can stay warm, where it can shelter from the weather, where it can be calm and alone. In such a place it rests and fasts. It may, for example, have lost a limb, but its mode of care does not include medicine, bandages, or surgery. It stays there alone until it has regained its strength. In the animal world, fasting represents an extremely important existential factor. Animals fast not only when sick or injured, but also during periods of hibernation or summer hibernation. In tropical countries, there are animals that sleep for the duration of the summer. Some animals fast during the mating season, and in many cases also during the lactation period. Some birds fast while hatching eggs. Other animals fast immediately after birth. There are species of spiders that abstain from eating for 6 months after being born. Wild creatures brought into captivity can often abstain from eating for several days before adapting to their new environment. The animals are able to endure forced fasts during periods of drought, snowfall, and severe cold, and can survive for long periods of time even when there is no food availability. Among people in different parts of the world, fasting has been practiced for centuries with religious meanings, for self-discipline, for political purposes, and as a means of healing the body. Only recently has the idea developed that to maintain strength, a person must eat. Dr. Felix Oswald, a Dutch physician who came to America at the end of the last century, says, "The curative method based on fasting is not limited only to the most highly evolved creatures. It is well known that pain, fever, gastric disorders, and even mental disorders reduce appetite, and only the inexperienced and unwise will attempt to thwart nature in this regard." The practice of fasting dates back to antiquity. It is mentioned in the Bible and in the writings of Homer. It was used to cure the sick in ancient Egyptian and Greek temples and in all Mediterranean countries. The use of fasting as a cure in acute illness dates back to ancient times. It was recommended by Arab physicians during the long dark night of the European Middle Ages. In Italy, Neapolitan doctors until about 150 years ago used to use fasts, which sometimes lasted up to 40 days in cases of patients suffering from fever. I have been involved in and conducting fasts since the summer of 1920. During this period of about 45 years, I conducted thousands of fasts, varying from a minimum of a few days to a maximum of 90, intended both as means of weight reduction and as aids to enable the body to recover from a wide variety of physical impairments. The case of an elderly man turns out to be of particular interest because of the astonishing results obtained. Mr. A.B. was 70 years old and had been ill for a long time. For 13 years, he had suffered from bronchial asthma to the point of being hospitalized 5 times during that period. He had been suffering from sinusitis for quite some time. For 6 years, he had been completely deaf in his left ear and had also been impotent for some years. He wore glasses, was bald, and had the usual minor symptoms indicating a general condition that was not good. It is a common rule to ignore such symptoms and not consider them alarm bells of illness. Although he had been subjected to the usual treatment methods for years, he had gained no benefit from them. Like so many others in the same condition as him, he went from bad to worse. It is generally known that the treatment usually given to asthma sufferers is only palliative, and that many times the patient gets worse as time passes. It is equally well known that the most common treatments do nothing more than provide only temporary relief to sinusitis sufferers. It should be added that very little is done to treat deafness or prostate enlargement. In fact, such conditions are generally termed incurable. After the 5th time, he was hospitalized in an attempt to treat his asthma, and having left his hospital bed in Chicago, Mr. A.B. went straight to the airport and took a plane bound for the South, to a place famous in the treatment of such disease. Since he was still breathing heavily, he was not sure if he would be able to overcome the difficulties of the trip, but he decided to try anyway. He was convinced that he had suffered enough and that the regular methods of treatment had not proved successful in curing him. In the same way as many other patients, he had blindly trusted the most widely used healing systems, but these had failed him. Once he arrived at the site, he was immediately admitted and ordered to immediately and forever stop taking all the medicines he used to take. "What should I do?" he asked, "if I get an asthma attack?" "Grit your teeth and fists and endure," was the reply. "You will never heal if you keep using medicine." He was ordered to get into bed and not to ingest anything except water until further notice. The treatment will turn out to be worse than the disease, he thought. How could he survive without food? His body was weakened by years of suffering and a very long period of time when he could not get the necessary amount of oxygen into his body. He was assured that he would always be closely monitored and that nothing bad could, however, happen to him. With much trepidation, he was about to begin what would be a new and surprisingly pleasant experience. Fasting is not always a pleasant experience, but it is certainly interesting and even enjoyable. The sense of liberation and tranquility one experiences during a period of abstinence from food allows one to discover the most remote truths of life, often forgotten or even imagined. At about 4 o'clock in the morning of the first night since he had started fasting, Mr. A.B. was struck by a severe paroxysm of asthma. If he remained lying in bed, he could not breathe, so he sat on the edge and called the doctor. The latter arrived and, after observing him, stated, "There is no need to worry. In just 24 hours you will be rid of the symptoms of asthma and you will be well." As soon as the doctor left the room, Mr. A.B. felt even more of a sense of suffocation and lack of air. "What kind of a place is this?" he asked his bedside neighbor. "They don't even bother to put me through this attack." He continued to feel sick for a few more minutes. Then the seizures ceased and sleep prevailed. When the doctor examined him the next morning, Mr. A.B. felt so well that he had forgotten and forgiven the apparent carelessness of the previous night. His happiness grew as time passed, and he was able to breathe as he had when he was a child, without the slightest hint of asthma. Throughout his time in that institution, he never again presented a paroxysm of asthma. His cavities were still in the process of drying up, and he continued his fasting. After about 6 days of abstinence from food, he was able to evacuate urine as easily as a child. The prostate had shrunk to almost normal size. He continued fasting, and day after day he observed the appearance of symptoms. His cavities were perfectly clean, his breathing normal, and his chest no longer gave sensations of pain. On the 25th day of fasting, he asked the doctor if it was possible to discontinue this practice. He was answered that this was premature, that his health had not yet returned to perfectly normal, and that it would be the right thing to continue. "Here you are not in a prison," said the doctor, "and no one can force you to fast against your will. But if you want my opinion, I think it is better to continue for a while longer." Mr. Abi followed the doctor's advice and continued fasting. The thing that most surprised him, and that he still continued to this day to consider a miracle, was that on the 36th day of fasting, he regained the hearing in the ear that had been deaf until then. His hearing was so perfect that he could even hear the ticking of a clock held at a not too close distance. And of notable importance is the fact that the recovery of his hearing proved permanent over time. He continued fasting until the 42nd day, then resumed consuming food. When he returned home, a few weeks after breaking the fast, he found that he was no longer powerless. Since the recovery of potency in men and the overcoming of frigidity in women are often the result of fasting, the directors of the institution were not at all surprised. This story is not made up. It is the real account of the restoration of a man who had suffered for most of his life. It is not an exception, but it must, however, be said that the recovery of hearing is not a fixed rule. It is only an occasional result of fasting. This is because deafness, like blindness, can be caused by a plethora of abnormal ear conditions, and not all of them are remediable. For the same reason, by fasting, blindness is recovered only occasionally, although restoration of good vision in refractive errors is not entirely uncommon. The incredible progress that occurs during a fast of appropriate length and carried out under the best conditions can only be appreciated by those who have experienced it. The general tendency of both the medical practitioner and the layman with regard to such recoveries is to give them no value, as they are considered too fanciful to be real. Nevertheless, it must still be said that the effects of fasting are by no means miraculous. If one thinks about it for a moment, one cannot but come to the conclusion that fasting is the most natural and most reasonable way of treatment for the sick. For over 140 years, natural hygienists have used fasting as a means of promoting good health and enabling the body to recover more quickly from illness. They have accumulated great experience in this field. This experience leads to the deep-seated conviction that fasting constitutes a constructive force to be used and developed as an integral part of modern life. Of course, there are also those who criticize fasting. Most of these people are not very informed about what it means to fast properly and what the best techniques are. A. Rabagliotti, AM, MD, FRCS, from England, expresses the concept very well in these brief words. The most common criticisms aimed at fasting are written by people who have never skipped a meal in their lives. Whether it is to maintain or restore health, to gain or lose weight, the role of fasting is a vitally important factor that cannot be ignored by advocates of personal health and physical and mental well-being. Chapter 2. The Disappearing Pounds. The business based on weight loss, controlling one's figure, diets, and all slimming products and programs has become one of the largest industries of the modern era. Everyone considers himself an expert in the field. Every month there is a new diet that lasts the span of a comet and then leaves the field to the next whim or fad. For a week you hear about the cream ice cream diet, then banana diets. After a few days, there is the protein diet. Only rare steak may be consumed. Eat to keep yourself thin. Excess weight is becoming an increasingly complex problem, not only for adult women and men, but also for children. There are a number of factors behind this, but in general it can be said that weight gain depends on the abundance of food available, higher wages, changes brought about in the field of work by the short week, reduced daily hours, modern means of transportation, and countless machines that lighten man's work not indifferently. At the very time when the reduced work system has halved food needs, increased production, artificial improvement in taste, and higher wages have helped to double food consumption. Hygienists are first and foremost realists. Nothing can deny the fact that the best, fastest, and safest way to lose weight is through fasting, and that the most effective way to maintain weight shape is expressed in rejecting a return to bad eating habits. The disappointingly slow method, among other things, of losing weight by resorting to the "I'm going on a diet" system is rarely successful due to the fact that it is a long-term procedure that requires more self-control and self-concentration than a normal person is capable of enduring. A frequent result in such programs is that, after a short period of time during which a few pounds are lost, the obese person returns to his or her usual eating excesses, immediately regaining the pounds lost and often gaining further weight. Only rarely do we observe an obese individual continue a diet for long periods of time. As I have often stated in talks I have given, and as I will forever continue to remind readers, one should not start a fast arbitrarily, that is, without the guidance of an expert in the field. Although fasting is absolutely safe as far as health is concerned, it involves the entire human organism. Therefore, it should always be controlled and directed by a qualified person who knows the consequences and can recognize the warning signs. How many pounds can you lose? The rate of loss varies from individual to individual, but the average for long-term fasting hovers around a pound a day. Can such substantial weight loss be dangerous? No, if conducted under appropriate supervision and with proper precautions regarding rest. I will briefly mention the most surprising benefits of fasting in weight reduction. 1. A sure and rapid decrease occurs during a fast. 2. Fasting is more enjoyable than a restricting diet. It lacks that annoying craving for food. 3. Weight loss does not produce flaccidity of skin and tissue. This does not happen in older people. When the obese individual undergoes such drastic weight loss, several indications of the development of better health follow. 1. The breath is freer. 2. Greater ease of movement occurs. 3. Gone is the sense of fatigue. 4. The feeling of fullness and heaviness in the stomach disappears. 5. Indigestion symptoms cease to bother. 6. Other disorders cease. 7. Blood pressure is lowered and the work done by the heart decreases. All of these benefits appear remarkable, but the improvements go far beyond weight loss, thus demonstrating that reducing the total amount of food ingested results in better health. There are, in fact, 1,000 reasons to argue that decreasing the consumption of sugars, starches, and fats and generally decreasing the total amount of food used is of great benefit to the body. In 1962, a woman, under my guidance, began a fast to decrease her weight. At the end, she stated, "It was a positive experience, the pleasure of watching my pounds fade away. It had never happened to me to see the fat disappear so quickly." After a 15-day fast undertaken to drop weight, another woman said, "I went to a very famous spa. They kept me on a diet of 700 calories a day. I was always hungry. This fasting was a pleasure." After a week of fasting to lose weight, a third woman exclaimed, "It was the best experience of my life. I enjoyed both fasting and resting. I didn't know that people could fast. I really enjoyed it." Are these common expressions? Not so much. Fasting does not always constitute that pleasurable experience described by the women in question, but it rarely reaches such unpleasant levels as to warrant its interruption before reaching its intended goal. It often represents a far better experience than those that most people experience on a daily basis with their eating habits. In many cases, meals are followed by actual discomfort or pain. In such states, fasting represents relief to become joy. There is always much satisfaction in watching fat dissolve at the rate of 1 or 2 pounds a day. Losing 9 pounds a week in the first few days of the fast is a highly pleasurable experience. There are exceptions where weight loss does not reach these levels. The rate of decline is not uniform, and there are periods when there is no loss for 1 or 2 days at a time. The rapid loss observed at the beginning of fasting does not continue throughout its duration. By fasting, not only is there a confidence regarding weight loss, but there is also a peace of mind that is difficult to find during any kind of diet. In fact, unlike those who lead a diet, those who fast are not always hungry. His taste buds are not a constant temptation. The flow of gastric juices is not continuously activated. It may happen that fasters manifest some type of craving for food during the first or second day of fasting, but this craving may also not appear at all. Hunger usually decreases starting from the third day. And unless fasting is interrupted for any reason, those who fast may continue fasting without experiencing weakness or hunger. My statements come from personal experiences that have also been verified by a variety of research. 2 series of experiments conducted by highly qualified hospital doctors have provided sufficient empirical evidence to satisfy researchers scientifically that fasting is not only the safest and fastest way to lose weight, but is also the most enjoyable. One such experiment was conducted by Leon Bloom, a physician at Piedmont Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia. He completed a considerable amount of experiments on fasting intended as a means of losing weight. His experiments were followed by those of Garfield Duncan, a physician at the University of Pennsylvania, who is considered an authority on slimming, and whose research includes the findings and conclusions reached by Bloom. These 2 researchers found that men who fasted were able to lose an average of about 1 pound and 300 grams per day, while women lost about 1 pound and 350 grams. Both Bloom and Duncan confirmed that the fasters were not hungry. In fact, they found a surprising absence of appetite unaccompanied, at least apparently, by physical or mental strain. One of the fasters stated, "I have never felt so good in all my life." One woman faster, after 48 hours without touching food, spontaneously stated that she was not even half as hungry as is usually found after skipping a meal. Summarizing the results of the experiments, Bloom asserts, "The current preoccupation with eating at regular intervals leads to the misconception that fasting is unpleasant." He goes on to say that, in his opinion, and as the results of the experiments had proven, fasting, provided one allows unlimited use of water, is well tolerated by the human system. In a subsequent series of experiments, Bloom allowed the faster to continue fasting for 4 consecutive weeks without unpleasant consequences. Reading the report of his experiments at the 111th annual meeting of the American Medical Association, Duncan stated, "Although short periods of fasting total may seem barbaric, this method of weight reduction is tolerated wonderfully. It has been proven that obese people find pleasure in fasting totally, perhaps because of their exaltation based on the fact that hunger is not a problem in the slimming process." Both observed that in fasts of longer duration, weight loss levels were measured at about 1 pound per day. Bloom stated that fasting had proven to be a very effective means of keeping weight under control. In the healthy individual who fasts only to drop weight, bed confinement is not necessary, but some exercise can be done. Contrary to popular belief, this does not increase the rate of loss, but helps invigorate tissue tone. The amount of exercise required to drop weight is in itself far greater than the average individual desires to perform, or, at any rate, than the average person should perform. To lose a pound of fat, one must play 23 holes of golf, saw wood for 10.5 hours, ride a horse for about 70 miles. Exercise, moreover, carries the risk of increasing appetite. During a fast, therefore, it should be limited and used only to the extent recommended by those in the know. Although there are different speeds of metabolism, my experience indicates that most cases of excess weight are not due to glandular dysfunction, but from habitual overeating. It is not true, in fact, that in some people, every food turns into fat. The truth is that such people not only eat more than they should, but also more than they actually desire. During a fast, what is the recommended rate of weight loss? The answer to this question is that since fasting represents total abstention, the body itself decides what the best rate of loss is. Usually, when fat tissue appears flaccid, it drops rapidly in the first few days of fasting. I have witnessed losses ranging from 2 to 3 pounds per day. In very many cases, losses of 10 pounds per week can be observed. In people with a low metabolic rate, the initial decline is very slow, sometimes even negligible. Once again, I want to repeat that any fasting lasting more than a few days should be carried out under specialist supervision. However, if organic defects or chronic afflictions, such as heart disease or blood depletion, occur, even fasts of short duration should be followed by a specialist. I again want to emphasize the fact that there are no dangers concerning fasting, but everyone should know that there are dangerous hidden conditions ready to manifest themselves in cases of food abstinence. I say this only to complete the picture I started about fasting. I want, however, to reassure the reader. Such cases are quite rare. If you are in good health, if you follow the steps correctly, if you undergo specialized monitoring, fasting will not just be a way to lose weight, but will represent a new adventure, the beginning of a whole new way of thinking. Chapter 3. Living Without Eating. In March 1963, newspapers around the world reported the incredible case of Ralph Flores, a 42-year-old pilot from California, and 21-year-old Helen Claiborne from Brooklyn. They were the survivors of a plane crash that occurred in a mountainous area of northern British Columbia. The couple was found on March 25, 1963, after 49 days of food withdrawal. By means of campfires, heavy clothes in which they had completely wrapped themselves, and proximity to each other, they managed to survive the intense cold. During the first 4 days immediately after the accident, Helen Claiborne fed herself with 4 cans of sardines, 2 cans of fruit, and some crackers. After 20 days, the couple consumed their last foods, 2 tubes of toothpaste. The melted snow became their food for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. For the last 6 weeks, the woman recounts, we fed ourselves on water. We prepared it 3 ways: hot, cold, and boiled. Varying in this way made it possible to kill the monotony of always the same meals. Ms. Claiborne, who appeared rather plump at the time of the plane crash, was pleasantly surprised at the end of her adventure to find that she had lost about 15 pounds. Flores, who had been forced to stay active during the enforced fast, had lost 20 pounds. Doctors who examined him soon after he was found him in surprisingly good condition. Thousands upon thousands of people have survived without food for even longer periods of time, not only without presenting any harm, but even benefiting from it. Periods of abstinence under conditions as harsh as the one experienced by these 2 people are extremely rare. Whatever our opinion may be about the origins of life, we must recognize that nature has provided for all needs, providing both plants and animals with supplies to use in cases of food shortages. In nature, famines are far more frequent than is commonly imagined. Winters, floods, droughts. Often such natural phenomena leave wild animals in serious trouble as far as procuring food is concerned. This rarely happens to domestic animals, who generally depend on their owners for food. In the wild, herbivorous and carnivorous animals often survive even with reduced food supplies. Stray dogs are almost always sparse. Similarly to dogs, lean and hungry wolves, whose bones have shrunken, are very common. At one time, it was not uncommon to find cattle and horses half-starved. What happens to these creatures in such dire conditions? Do they starve to death? Very rarely is the answer. In his zoological sketches, Dr. Felix L. Oswald writes, in unorganized countries, animals quickly become accustomed to the vicissitudes of their wildlife. In 1877, the cows of the Brazilian pampas managed to overcome a terrible 10-month drought by drawing water from bulbous roots, cactus leaves, and holes dug in the muddy sandy riverbeds. That dry spell had almost completely exterminated the domestic livestock of southern Brazil. Solid food is only a secondary requirement. The Hammer dog breed in Syria manages to survive in regions where a hunter would never be able to practice his profession, and where water is as scarce as in the driest deserts. In spite of this, they multiply, and Hammer mothers, like all poor mothers, generally bear numerous offspring. They are said to give birth to 6 young at the very least. A sausage maker would probably not invest a single penny on Hammer dogs. The word thinness is not sufficient to describe their physical condition. Thin as a pulled strap would render the idea more, if such an expression can be used in such a situation. Skin and sinews, pulled on a framework of bones. I saw their relatives in Dalmatia and wondered why they were not jingling in the race. But Dalmatia is still a country of vineyards and rabbits, while the Syrian desert no longer even produces berries. Without moisture, not even magic could generate fruit. It is very important that the animals are able to survive in such conditions and reproduce generation after generation. An enclosed weasel can survive for several days without food, and as soon as it is free, it will begin to seek it. The hibernating bear, which does not consume food for long periods of time, gives birth to its cub and secretes milk with which it will feed it. Fasting salmon and male seals are very active during the period of abstinence from food. These few examples of activity during a fast are sufficient to show that the fasting body has its own means of meeting its energy needs. One of Sweden's most famous biochemists, Nobel laureate Dr. Ragnar Berg, an authority on nutrition, says, "A person can fast for long periods of time. I know people have fasted for over 100 days, therefore one should not be afraid of starvation." The actual period of enforced abstinence of Mr. Flores and Miss Claiborne was of relatively moderate duration. The point is not how long man can fast, but what are the means of nature that enable him to do so. Consumption and rejection, re-establishment and replenishment are continuous and quite simultaneous processes in all existing structures and do not stop during a fast. The hibernating animal, in colder regions, must produce sufficient heat to keep its body warm. During a fast, both humans and animals must breathe, and the heart must continue to beat. The blood must continue to flow, and the excretory organs must continue their work to rid tissues of waste substances. Vital functions must still be carried on, albeit at a reduced rate. Cells must be replenished, wounds must heal. As I have observed in years of study, all this continues even during a fast. Indeed, as I shall show later, physical development and growth can be had while not consuming food. All manifestations of life, motion, secretion, digestion, and the like, depend on the utilization of the body's materials. If an organ is to work, it must be supplied with suitable materials. In the absence of fresh materials to replace those already used, the organ does not work and becomes weakened. If life is to continue, an irreducible basic level of activity is necessary. Even hibernating animals, whose activities are minimized, must breathe and their hearts must beat. The case of the bear who manages to give birth during hibernation, and who nurses her cub with milk also produced during hibernation, provides a significant example of the varied possibilities that the fasting animal possesses for meeting bodily needs, possibilities that come from sources other than food. All these activities require food that must be secured from some source while the animal is fasting. In order to fully understand how the body is able to survive periods of food withdrawal, when food is scarce or cannot be digested, one must thoroughly analyze the process by which the body nourishes its vital tissues and performs its essential functions during periods of prolonged fasting. The normal body provides itself with a stockpile of nutrient materials set aside in the form of fat, bone marrow, glycogen, muscle extracts, milk, minerals, and vitamins. The healthy body always has stored an appropriate and sufficient nutritional supply to get through days, weeks, even 2 or 3 months of food deprivation. This is true both in cases of forced fasting, such as that of a plane crash or miners stranded by a landslide, as well as in cases of fasting as a result of illnesses that do not allow the ingestion or digestion of food, and in the case of the free choice of those who intend fasting as a means of losing weight. If no food is consumed, the body makes use of its own reserves to nourish tissues. When these reserves are depleted, slimming occurs. Fundamental to fasting is the fact that our inner larder contains sufficient nourishment to sustain the body in most cases for long periods, especially when this is stored and not wasted unnecessarily. In the blood and lymph, in the bones, especially bone marrow, fat, liver, and other glands, and even in the individual cells that make up the body, there are reserves of proteins, fats, sugars, minerals, and vitamins to be used in times of scarcity or lack of food. Neither animal nor human can survive long periods of abstinence from food unless they have internally that reserve food with which to meet emergency calls. The fasting organism will not be harmed by abstinence if its reserves are sufficient to meet the nutritive needs of the tissues. Even lean individuals possess food reserves in their tissues that help them overcome fasting. Even these people will have no problem in fasting for a varied period of time. By means of the process known technically as autolysis, carried out by enzymes in the tissues, these reserves are made available for use by the tissues to which they are carried by the blood and lymph. The glycogen, or animal starch, stored in the liver, is converted into sugar and distributed to the tissues as needed. It is significant that even in prolonged fasts, those deficiency diseases, such as beriberi, pellagra, rickets, scurvy, or others, do not occur, to show that the body's reserves are generally well balanced. Fasting has been shown to improve rickets and calcium metabolism. In cases of anemia, the number of red blood cells increases during fasting. I have witnessed improvements occurring during a fast in several cases of pellagra. By fasting, one is able to maintain and even establish biochemical balance. It is important to know these things, for if not, fasting might seem harmful. Numerous animal experiments have shown that underfeeding, as opposed to overeating, tends to prolong life and develop better health. Other experiments concerning fasting, rather than underfeeding, have shown that it not only prolongs lifespan, but also results in a remarkable level of regeneration and invigoration. Thousands of human and animal experiments have established the fact that when the organism lives without nutrition, tissues are consumed in reverse order of their importance. Fat is the first tissue to disappear. Before the functional tissues of the body are consumed to provide nourishment to the most important tissues, such as the brain and nerves, heart and lungs, stored reserves are used. The body's way of behaving about the stocks of proteins, sugars, fats, minerals, and vitamins, of distributing, using, and storing them, reveals almost superhuman ingenuity. The aggregates of the body's tissues can be considered the nutrient reservoirs, to be used in every way and in every part according to need. But these tissues are not wasted indiscriminately. On the contrary, the waste of the most important organs is balanced by the limited use by the lower organs of the materials needed by the main ones. Many of the most essential nutrients, and this applies mainly to certain minerals, are retained. All the research conducted on humans and animals to determine the losses of various tissues and organs during prolonged periods of food abstinence was done on organisms that were on the verge of starvation and, in fact, eventually died. Starving and fasting are two totally different stages of abstinence. It should seem self-evident that the extreme losses observed in the starvation stages of abstinence starvation are far greater than in fasting of average duration. In normal fasting, extreme losses are never recorded. Should these occur, fasting should be stopped immediately. The differences between fasting and starving must be recognized. Fasting means abstaining from food while still possessing adequate reserves to nourish vital tissues. Starvation means abstaining from food when those reserves have already been exhausted, thereby damaging vital tissues. There are definite signs that warn when reserves are about to be depleted. Hunger returns to such an intensity that it drives the person to seek food, whereas during proper fasting, there is no desire for food. This difference between fasting and starvation should serve the reader to dispel the notion that starvation develops when meals are skipped. Contrary to popular and even professional opinion, the vital tissues of a fasting organism, that is, the tissues that carry on life, do not begin to perish at the very moment abstinence begins. The fasting organism does drop in weight, but the loss, even over an extended period of time, involves reserves and not organic tissues. In nature, there are numerous examples of growth during a fast, both of the organism as a whole and of the lost parts. Experiments have shown that fasting calves continue to grow. The fasting starfish manages to develop a new stomach, new retractile tubercles, and new arms. The salamander that has lost its tail manages to form a new tail even when it refrains from eating. These facts unveil an obvious truth. The process of fasting does not interrupt the constructive functions of life. These continue in a surprising way. The efficiency of the living organism in regulating the consumption of its resources during a fast is one of the wonders of life. During periods of abstinence, the less important organs, despite being consumed to feed the major tissues, do not degenerate until they reach the starvation stage. Muscle atrophy does not exceed that found after a long period of physical inactivity, and there are no decreases in muscle cells. These shrink, fat disappears from the muscles, but the muscle retains its integrity and surprising strength. Weight loss varies according to the character and quality of tissues, the quality of physical and emotional activity performed, and the temperature surrounding the fasting person. Physical activity, emotional stresses, cold and poor tissues accelerate the process of weight loss. Fat is eliminated much faster than other tissues in the body. Physical condition is, arguably, the determining factor in determining the proper length of a fast. For example, in the case of the two plane crash survivors, who survived for 4 weeks without ingesting food, their salvation was snow, which is water, and which kept them from the danger of dehydration. They could survive without food, but the lack of water would be fatal to them. Whether willingly or unwillingly, the faster must have water. It is clear, then, that fasting must be conducted intelligently, taking necessary precautions and with common sense. In the same way that a novice swimmer seeks the guidance and advice of an expert before jumping into the water, so too should the inexperienced fasting person obtain the advice and guidance of a trusted person as a precautionary measure before embarking on a fast of any duration. Chapter 4. Hunger versus Appetite. Many efforts have been made to try to explain the mechanism that drives the sense of hunger, but with little success. I believe that at least as far as higher animals are concerned, there is no doubt that hunger is caused by the nervous system, but this can only be stated in a general sense. What the feeling of hunger really represents has been the subject of much speculation. For practical purposes, a distinction must first be made between actual hunger and the other sensations that are often and erroneously considered hunger stimuli. Unfortunately, many physiological studies done on hunger have been limited to short periods of abstinence from food, a few days at most, however, not enough to provide a clear picture of how the body's demand for food manifests itself. Interestingly, established physiologists still describe hunger in many cases as an almost pathological manifestation. Hunger is a sensation of pain and discomfort present in the stomach region. It manifests itself in the typical hunger pangs. It is a bite in the stomach, an unpleasant sensation, a sense of weakness, all part of the popular mythology surrounding the topic of hunger. Even a headache is mistaken for hunger, sometimes even by experienced professionals. The truth is that hunger is a normal sensation, not an abnormal one, and that all normal sensations are pleasurable. It is wrong to regard it in terms of symptoms of a disease, just as it would be wrong to regard thirst or all other normal desires of the body in this way. Normal hunger, like the sensation of thirst, is manifested by a general physical condition, the universal desire for food, located in the mouth, nose, and throat. There are no hunger pangs in normal hunger. There is only a pleasant sensation in the nose, mouth, and throat, along with increased salivation in the mouth. The hungry person knows that he or she craves food. He or she feels no pain or irritation. It is a false appetite that manifests itself in the form of mild irritation, stomach bites, a sense of weakness, and various emotional disturbances. The differences between such irritation and the real sense of hunger are quite distinct. The person accustomed to eating at all hours feels the sensation of hunger very rarely, and consequently, confuses such feelings with the real desire for food. Since eating usually alleviates the symptoms of the disorders, the person becomes convinced that the food was just what he or she needed. Often this is just food revenge. The individual eats to forget his psychological miseries in the same way the alcoholic drinks. Real hunger is selective rather than indiscriminate. It does not require greedy gorging, but often targets a particular type of food. And the same has no need for fancy dishes, but is satisfied with simple dishes. The unrestrained eater who has no genuine hunger pangs is often tormented by a vague desire to eat, without knowing exactly what he is craving for. Typically something well-seasoned and exotic. Hunger is an intermittent sensation and occurs when the need for food exists. It is never continuous. Those who are always hungry actually present pathological symptoms. Am I saying that the majority of people cannot determine when they are hungry? Yes. Beginning with birth and the food program of 3 meals a day, common in our modern civilization, the average person in an average civilization does not know what real hunger is. Since hunger is the normal expression of a need for food, it may be considered implied that when this does not occur, such immediate desire does not exist. Thus, either such need is not present, or the actual ability to make use of the commodities is absent. In the absence of hunger, there is no reason to make use of food. There is a well-founded basis for believing that the digestive system receives and digests food in the best way, precisely in the absence of hunger, and that in such a condition, the digestive processes appear slowed down or suspended altogether. We are so accustomed to eating at certain times that we sometimes insist on ignoring even a strong revulsion to food. Whether hungry or not, we eat out of routine, as a social activity because there is nothing else to do, or because by eating, we think we find relief from our worries. The most important rule in our eating habits, and in any case, in daily life, is, in sickness or in health, never force food into the stomach unless there is a spontaneous demand for it manifested by means of actual hunger. In adults, alcohol, tobacco, coffee, sexual abuse, strong emotions, and fatigue result in the loss of normal desire for food. Pain, fever, inflammation, and abdominal disorders cause loss of appetite. There is no better way for the adult to heal such a situation than to refrain from eating until appetite returns, until breathing is normal, the tongue clean, and desire for food is restored. One should consume food only when one is serene and has regained self-mastery. In acute illness, hunger does not occur for the simple reason that energies are directed in other directions. There is no energy to be wasted on work, such as digestion, which can be suspended temporarily. Not only is nerve energy diverted to the most urgent work, but also blood is diverted to those parts that require more of it in order to do the extra work of the moment. In this enormous effort, digestion is suspended in the same way that this happens during any arduous physical exertion, such as running. Despite this, food is often consumed according to the medical saying that in order to be strong, one must eat. In such cases, sometimes food is rejected or expelled from the digestive tract by way of diarrhea. If it is not emitted in these ways, it constitutes an extra burden on the digestive system, increasing poisoning in the body. Although unnecessary materials are expelled from the body, the effort it makes in trying to rid itself of unwanted nourishment diminishes the body's defensive and expulsive efforts against the cause of disease. Forces are diverted from the task of healing and are needlessly expended in an effort that could be avoided by the simple expedient of fasting. This temporary and partial suspension of the restorative attempt slows down the patient's recovery. In fact, the repugnance to food that occurs could rightly be considered a closed-for-repair signal placed at the entrance to the digestive tract. It should be noted. Sometimes, when we are sick, we think we want to eat, but this is a false desire that, if fulfilled, increases suffering. I remember a personal experience of mine when I was still a teenager. I had a mild fever, felt sick, was breathing hard, had a bad taste in my mouth, and felt a general sense of malaise. Following my intuition, I went to bed. But I was hungry, or, at any rate, I thought I was. I felt like I was craving sardines. I wanted them so badly that I thought I would taste them in my mouth. So I asked my mother to bring me sardines. She did not think they were a suitable food for a sick boy. But I, as a good, intelligent child, had learned that with a little insistence, my parents would give in and satisfy my desire. So I kept asking for sardines. Finally, my mother decided to go out and buy a tin of sardines. She arranged them on a plate and brought them closer to my bed. I tasted a very small piece and returned the plate to my mother. I realized that I didn't really want anything. My body did not want any kind of food. Although I knew absolutely nothing about fasting at that time, I instinctively fasted, and without the help of medication, I recovered in a short time. Many times I have seen parents use every means of persuasion to convince their sick children to eat, despite their insistent refusals. A common way of persuasion is to bribe children with promises of toys, sweets, or baseball gloves. "This bite is for Mom," is the common phrase. "The doctor said you have to eat it. If you don't eat, you won't get well." It is only ignorance that allows us to intimidate sick children with these false truisms. In chronic illness, a person tends to believe that he or she is hungry, but his or her sensations are, in fact, only irritations of the digestive tract. These morbid symptoms disappear when the individual fasts. If the craving for food had been the real indication of a need for nutrition, the bites would increase as the fasting progressed. The fact that the hunger ceases and that the patient feels comfortable are sure indications that such sensations are not related to actual hunger. The saying that hunger ceases on the third day of fasting implies that, instead, it is present on the first two. This is usually unresponsive to reality. It is only gastric irritation that ceases on the second, third, or fourth day of fasting. Chapter 5. 4 Good Reasons to Fast. The purposes of fasting are varied and many. They extend from factors concerning bodily health and weight reduction to religious concepts and rituals, although the latter are usually of too short a duration to be considered serious fasts, usually not exceeding 1 day. Certainly, weight reduction is a desirable goal, but should we consider it as unique? Are there no other hygienic factors involved in weight loss? Are there no other physical and health benefits to be gained by beneficial fasting? Dr. Robert Walter, distinguished for his work on hygienics, was head of the famous Walter Park Hygienic Sanatorium in Wernesville, Pennsylvania. He claimed that starvation cure, the way the German nature curists and early hygienists used to call fasting, is extremely beneficial in many diseases. In order to understand how fasting can help the human organism, we must briefly examine the basic areas in which total fasting, with the exception of water, plays an important role. We have already begun to explore what we can call the number 1 area, weight reduction. There is no doubt that fasting produces the fastest, safest, and most efficient way to lose weight. But it is important to note that in the cases of obese people, weight loss is an added benefit when it is not the only reason for fasting. A second reason is what I call physiological compensation, where nature's delicate automatic balance comes into play. In order to exceed on one side, nature must economize on another. This fact applies to all actions and operations of living beings, including human beings. If you are filling your bathtub with water and at the same time turn on the kitchen sink faucet, the flow in the bathtub immediately decreases. When you turn off the kitchen faucet, immediately the flow of water in the bathtub returns to increase. A similar phenomenon occurs in the operations carried out by the body. If food has to be digested, a large amount of blood has to flow to the digestive organs, and the body consequently tends to be sluggish, to fall asleep. If heavy work is done, the digestive process is practically suspended. Fasting, by conserving the energy that the body usually uses to do the work of the digestive system, allows those energies to be diverted to other channels, and thus to do other work. The energy saved by one part can be used by another. The third reason is to allow physiological rest, that is, rest of the digestive, glandular, circulatory, respiratory, and nervous systems. It can generally be said that the more food is ingested, the more work has to be done by the organs that form these systems. When there is a significant reduction in the amount of food consumed, the organs rest. If no use of food is made, then the organs are in a state of total rest. It is not very difficult to understand that in the absence of food, the glands of the mouth and stomach, the digestive tract, the liver and pancreas do not have to work and, therefore, rest. And equally, it should not be difficult to understand that both the heart and the arteries have lightened by a considerable amount of weight, and therefore, they too rest. The resident glands in the body, other than those that secrete digestive juices, also reduce their secretory activity. Breathing is slowed down, and the nervous system works less. All this means rest. There is a theory that claims that the metabolism and inactivity of fasting man resembles that of the hibernating animal. It states that only during the prenatal phase of man's existence is there greater immobilization of the digestive tract and muscles than is present during a fast. This is partly true, but it must, however, be kept in mind that the fasting man is not as inactive as the hibernating animal, nor as the embryo. In fact, as far as the mind and muscles are concerned, the fasting man, unless he takes to his bed, relaxes his body and quiets his mind, can keep himself active. It remains true, however, that the closer the faster can get to the inactivity of the prenatal stage of existence, the faster his progress will be. The rejuvenation of cellular structures will be in relation to his inactivity. The fourth reason is the important factor of elimination. J.H. Tilden, founding physician of the famous School of Hygiene and Sanitation in Denver, Colorado, editor and publisher of 2 journals and writer of several books, states, "After 55 years spent in the wild world of medical therapies, I am compelled to declare, without fear of being contradicted, that fasting represents the only safe therapeutic evacuator for man." Felix L. Oswald, M.D., agrees with him, claiming, "Fasting represents the best renewing system. 3 days of fasting a year purifies the blood and eliminates poisons more effectively than 100 bottles of purgative solutions." There is nothing else that, on a par with fasting, is capable of increasing the elimination of waste substances from the blood and tissues. It is a very short time from the time when food is withheld to the time when the eliminatory organs increase their activity, and a real physiological cleansing work is established. As fasting progresses, repressed secretions, or more properly, retained wastes, are expelled from the body and the system is purified. A release of irritation follows. The body is at rest. In terms of life, the individual appears remade. It probably takes only a few days to rid the blood and lymph of toxic excesses, but fasting continues in its action and causes the expulsion of toxins that had long been deposited in less important tissues. The nutrient scarcity created by fasting forces the body to consume, by means of autolysis, all superfluous tissue and nutrient stores, then using both to sustain the body's major tissues. In this process, accumulated toxins are released into the circulation to be carried to the excretory organs and, thus, eliminated. Dr. Oswald states, "Without employing any strenuous digestive labor, nature uses free time to perform her general cleansing. The accumulations of superfluous tissues are carefully examined and analyzed. The component parts at hand are sorted to the departments of nutrition. The elimination of superfluous and excess material, which cannot be achieved in a state of satiety, is compatible with the increased strength and physiological and even biological readjustment processes observed during fasting. Excretion is one of the fundamental functions of life and is as essential to the continued existence of organisms as nutrition. More than 100 years ago, Sylvester Graham, the writer of Science of Human Life and the initiator of the first health and hygiene crusade in 1831, Graham's flour and bread were named after him, emphasized the fact that in all living things there is an economy of dissimilation and excretion similar to that of nutrition. As long as an organism maintains itself in life, assimilation and growth on the one hand and excretion on the other are in constant operation. There is a constant effort to maintain the normal purity of fluids in the body by the continuous expulsion of waste and useless substances. Anything that the body cannot utilize as food must be expelled, so the excretory process must be as continuous as the nutritive process. Day and night, awake or asleep, from before birth until death, the processes by which waste substances are excreted are uninterrupted. In principle, the two processes, nutritive and excretory, are carried out by different organs, but there is some overlap. The body's energies are always divided between assimilation and elimination, but sometimes one process assumes a right of precedence over the other. Under special physical conditions, excretion becomes more important and assimilation is minimized. There is a theory which holds that during food intake, excretion is suppressed. This theory holds that the body cannot assimilate and eliminate at the same time. Although there is some truth in this, we cannot say that it is strictly so. Excretion must continue, even while food is being digested. Otherwise, the waste material would accumulate, and we would have death by self-poisoning. It is safer to suspend the nutritive processes for a short time than to stop the excretory ones, although the same total suspension of nutritive processes would be equally fatal. Only in a limited sense can we say that it is true that assimilation blocks elimination. There is another theory that states that the increased excretion observed during a fast is only inherent in the effort made by the body to secure nourishment for the major tissues. In this case, the principle is that as the body liquefies the less essential tissues, and with these nourishes and sustains the more important ones, the accumulated toxins are released into the blood and lymph and carried to the excretory organs and excreted. The search for nourishment appears to be the primary factor, while the excretion of toxins is secondary to the effort to find food. In my opinion, this concept holds much truth. Waste substances and toxins are contained in tissues, especially in fatty and connective tissues, and when these tissues are consumed, the accumulated toxins are released. This would explain the continuous increase in secretion, as it is thought that the toxic amount carried by the blood and lymph would be eliminated in a few days by the immediate increase in secretion caused by withdrawal. Nevertheless, is it rational to assert that a function so fundamental to existence as excretion is secondary to any other bodily function? I have serious doubts about this. The energy expended in the two processes is more or less in constant relation to both. Since fasting reduces the expenditure of energy related to digestion, the amount of it that is saved remains available for use in other channels, and for the more accurate performance of those processes and functions that at the moment appear more important than the digestive action. The body is able to mobilize its forces for other purposes, such as elimination or healing. That this is the correct interpretation of the action being performed is shown both by the fact that rest alone, without fasting, increases elimination, although not to the same levels, and by the fact that reducing the amount of food ingested also increases elimination. It seems, therefore, that anything that decreases the work of the body increases that of elimination. During a fast, the real increase in excretion is observed even before the consumption of food reserves. And this is especially seen in the increased performance of the kidneys that were previously inhibited in function, as is often the case in heart disease. In these cases, the increase in excretion is observed before any possible improvement in cardiac efficiency. There is also the fact that, in the early part of fasting, as indeed in the late part, the increase in elimination is not in proportion to the amount of tissue consumed. The increased use of energy employed in the elimination function seems to be partially responsible for the increase. Some people ask, can cancer be cured by fasting? My answer is that while I have seen cases of cancer decrease significantly during a fast, I have never seen one heal completely. It has been observed that diseased tissues are the first to be consumed by the body in an attempt to meet the nutritional needs required by functional and vital tissues. Dr. Berg claims that this is the greatest healing effect of fasting, an opinion that I do not fully agree with. The utilization of such tissues is but a small part of the beneficial effects of fasting. Regarding fasting in relation to tissues and particularly cancer, Dr. Berg says, one might infer, perhaps a little hastily, that it is precisely the diseased or altered tissues with less resistance that are the first to be affected by this. But this is not always true, and particularly so with regard to cancer. In fact, we often notice that although the patient loses weight, the tumor continues to grow. It is really a very clear fact in that the cancerous tumor is autonomous and often encapsulated. Therefore, it is not in direct contact with the rest of the body. While the concept of tumor autonomy is debatable, it is true that in some cases, the tumor continues to grow even during a long-term fast. Sometimes, the cancerous growth is greatly reduced in extent, but I have never seen one totally disappear. Benign tumors are often nicked and resorbed. Adds Berg, also during a fast, when no new food is consumed, an attempt is made to provide the body with the opportunity to mobilize all accumulated waste products, consume them, and eliminate them. Since the accumulated waste material is largely oxidized material, we speak of elimination instead of oxidation, which is caused by the consumption of tissues during a fast. During a fast, the expulsion of hydropic degenerations, edemic accumulations, swellings, infiltrations, and growths of different kinds is often rapid. Chapter 6. Rising Forces and Energies. I don't feel any different from when I started fasting. I am very well. The statement comes from a young woman who had started a fast for 3 days to drop weight. She had not noticed any decrease in her strength. In fact, she felt an exhilarating sensation, an almost euphoric sense of lightness. This is not an isolated incident. A fact observed in thousands of cases is that a large number of individuals, instead of losing their strength during a fast, gain it. In many individuals who followed common energy diets, developed a steadily increasing weakness. As soon as they undertook a fast, they became strong again. Paradoxical as it may seem, it is true that weaker people benefit most from periods of abstinence. Weakness, in most cases, is not due to lack of food, but rather to a condition of intoxication of the body. It is commonly believed that the weak person must get well. He is considered too weak to fast. Even when the patient continues to weaken despite the consumption of so-called good nutritious food, he is urged to insist on that kind of nutrition. Never was the mistake more egregious. When a patient is so weak that he is no longer able to move in bed, when he is subject to pain and high fevers, he does not possess the energy to perform the digestive function. Will he return to health if fed abundantly? Probably yes, but this will not be due to the power supply. If he dies, the cause of that may have been overeating at a critical time. Will he recover if he fasts? Not always. However, the chances are greater than in the previous case. It is a popular belief that man must replenish his food supply at regular and close intervals, and that he will weaken and eventually die if he skips a few meals. Whether in sickness or in health, we must eat 3 or more times a day. We must be deaf, blind, and dumb to the symptoms of illness and continue to eat despite such warnings. If you have no desire for it, do it anyway. If you feel a real revulsion for food, pay no attention to it. If you feel nauseous, eat. If your digestive functions are so impaired and deficient that digestion is impossible, eat anyway. This is the popular belief. How often do we hear of someone who was declared able to be fed and then deteriorated? This is such a frequent warning that it is difficult to understand why the link between the advice to feed a patient and the subsequent worsening of his or her condition is not immediately detected. A famous example from the past is the case of the world-famous actor, Joseph Jefferson. During his last illness, Dr. E. Page issued the following medical bulletin. April 16th, he did not withhold food. April 20th, the patient appears in better condition. April 20th, he withheld food. April 21st, more rough, less favorable conditions. Mr. Jefferson suffered from pneumonia, a disease in which it is especially important not to eat. Moreover, before he became ill with pneumonia, he had suffered from gastritis for several months. At first, his illness was described as an attack of indigestion due to a break in his diet following a visit to a friend. During his pneumonia, he did not manifest any desire for food, nor did he have the ability to digest and assimilate it, but nevertheless, he was fed. This was followed by force feeding with the addition of alcohol and cardiotonics. At his death, it was declared that, after all, age was what it was. Thousands of people every year die prematurely because of improper nutrition. Today, as then, we do not hear much about these cases. It is a process that continues, as people are convinced that they know how to eat well. It seems difficult to learn anything from these experiences, even though they happen frequently. Because they are cases that do not strike a chord with the public, they are destined to remain in the dark. If fasting were practiced in such cases, not only would the suffering be alleviated, but the heart would be allowed to rest and the work of the kidneys would be relieved. Administering cardiotonics to strengthen the heart and morphine to quell the pain and discomfort caused by thoughtless eating, instead of abstaining from food, can kill the patient. The sick person recovers if put on an empty stomach and suffers relapses if fed prematurely. These results should make clear the serious damage done to the sick person by mindless feeding. It is almost always a rule that the seriously ill person regains his strength by fasting as the symptoms of his illness disappear, to the point that by the time the spontaneous desire for food reappears, his strength is almost surprising. It is not uncommon to observe how a patient fed regularly, but nevertheless too weak to get out of bed, regains strength almost immediately as soon as he begins a fast, and how, at the end of a week or 10 days of abstinence, he is able to get up and walk. I have seen cases of patients so weak that although they ate plenty, they were unable to climb stairs, and I have seen the same patients, after a few days of fasting, run up and down stairs. During the last years of the last century and the first years of the current one, many fasters attempted to determine what amount of work the body could sustain during abstinence from food. They prided themselves on being able, better during a fast than during periods of normal eating, to win running races, set world records in weightlifting, and to work mentally and physically longer and with greater intensity. Some were able to work beyond normal working hours, late into the night. Tanner ran a running race with a journalist and won it. Gilman Lowe set several world weightlifting records. McFadden continued to lift weights. Many continued to perform their daily activities, even during extended periods of fasting. I know of the case of a man who worked in an accounting office. He claimed that during periods of fasting his mind was sharper, and his reactions appeared not only more accurate, but also faster. A fasting man was interviewed by a journalist who refused to believe that the man he was talking to, who had already been fasting for several days, was not experiencing physical weakness. "I can prove it," the fasting man told the reporter. "I am in better shape than you." The reporter asked him if by this he meant to challenge him. "Yes, I challenge you to run 100 meters. The race was organized, the two runners lined up at the start, and the race was started. The journalist was younger than the fasting man and much more athletic, but he lost to the man who had not eaten for several days. Another man, an expert in fasting, told me, "The brain becomes wonderfully efficient. The body becomes aware of its own strength. Apathy and aversion to physical and mental labor disappear, and daily one faces one's duties with vigor, and energy and joy that all men should feel." Of course, those who fast must always strictly follow the expert's advice. This is especially true for physically weak individuals whose strength may be less than that of a healthy person. However, in all cases, when the expert advises breaking the fast, this should be done immediately. In some cases, fasting must be stopped after 2 or 3 days. Good. If this is what the expert commands, it must be done. As in all other human activities, wisdom, caution, and common sense must be guiding. However, in most cases, fasting under appropriate supervision, continued for the duration suitable to the needs and physical requirements of the individual, will make him stronger in his general, physical, and mental condition. Chapter 7. Does fasting kill? To erase all qualms in common opinion about fasting would require endless discussion. However, it is necessary to examine the erroneous positions and clarify them once and for all. The most important one is the mistaken belief that fasting can kill. One basic point must be kept in mind. Fasting does not mean starving. Starving means continuing to abstain from food beyond the body's limits of tolerance. That is, when the individual has reached the point where weakness takes over from strength. Since all fasting should and must be conducted under the direction of an expert, when he orders fasting to be stopped before it ceases to be fasting and turns into starvation, it must be done without hesitation. Can starvation kill if abstention from food is prolonged over time until all stages are covered? Certainly it can. In some cases where common sense was deliberately ignored, this has happened. Mrs. Gloria Lee Bird, author of 2 science fiction books, died at the age of 37 as a result of prolonged abstinence from food. She had fasted for 66 days. She claimed that she had received instructions from JW, a ruler of another planet who had called her from Jupiter, and induced her to fast for purposes of peace. She was to continue the fast until JW sent to Earth what Mrs. Bird described as the cosmic elevator to transport her to Jupiter. We are not sure whether she fasted totally throughout the entire 66 days. The doctors at the hospital in Washington, D.C., where she died, were of the opinion that she had initially sustained herself with fruit juices, but that during her last month of life she had been on a complete fast. Again, we are faced with an error in terminology frequent in these cases. The newspapers reported that she allowed herself to starve for 66 days. They subsequently stated that she had been fasting completely for at least 30 days during that time period. Since her fasting was voluntary, although undertaken according to instructions received from an extraterrestrial, it can be said that she fasted, in the true sense of the word, for a certain period of time, and that only in the latter part of that period did starvation take over. It is likely that she died of starvation. It certainly cannot be said that she died of fasting. Since the report of her death does not provide us with information about her constitution, physical condition, rate of weight loss, activity during her abstinence, and other details that we would need to be aware of in order to determine how long the fast lasted and when the starvation began, we do not feel able to venture opinions on this. I inferred from the photograph that she was a woman of small build. She did not look fat. She had been an air hostess, and since in this profession the women chosen must be of a certain height, I deduced that she was not short. Perhaps 50 days represented her maximum fasting limit, but this would also have to depend on her physical and emotional activities. Mrs. Bird lost consciousness only 4 days before she died without ever returning to her senses. How she was treated in the hospital during those last 4 days has not been disclosed. Physiologically, it is impossible to die of fame without having attained a skeletal condition, but death can occur, eating or fasting, at any time and from different causes. Fasting, as it has been described by me in this book, does not cause death. Death from lack of food occurs only after the total depletion of the body's food reserves. Thus, it does not occur immediately, since it is possible to keep essential organs alive by sacrificing less important ones. During fasting, advanced stage cancer, heart disease, Bright's disease, or other disease of a similar nature can cause death. In these cases, it is incorrect to attribute death to fasting. Those patients would die even without fasting, and in most cases, it is almost certain that the process would be faster if they fed. One example of a death wrongly attributed to fasting is that of a 9-year-old boy living in Albany, New York, in September 1932. The judiciary attributed the death to starvation. The newspapers did not report how long the boy had abstained from food, but stated that he collapsed while at school. In truth, no boy close to dying of starvation goes to school regularly. In a real state of starvation, the boy would have lacked the strength to walk. He would have been bedridden for several days before dying. The news also reported that the boy had been stricken with convulsions. Seizures are never a complication of starvation. Stories that try to keep alive the myth that the sick person should be given good nutritious food to keep him or her strong are completely wrong. If someone dies during a fast, tabloid newspapers flaunt the death by attributing it to starvation, without knowing the condition of the faster and the real details of the case. Such stories bring out the starvation, and the public generally draws a distorted picture of fasting. What would be the results if newspapers published the details of every death that occurred in a hospital in a large city during the entire span of a year, giving the name of the doctor assigned to the case, the name of the hospital, the medicines used or the operations performed, and attributed each death to the medicines or operations? Such a procedure might not convince the public that all medicines are harmful, but it would certainly leave all doctors dismayed. Of course, fasting cannot work miracles, especially for those patients with serious conditions who adopt fasting as a last resort. It cannot be said that fasting will enable every man, woman, or child, regardless of the condition and stage of the disease, to return to health. Its limitations are the same as those of the organism. Fasting is not a cure. Healing is a spontaneous biological process and is limited to the capacity of the body, whether fasting or not. Desperate cases who have already reached the stage of irreversibility will not be able to recover if, as a last hope, they try the fasting route. Indeed, in most cases, the danger is not that the patient will starve, but that he will be stuffed to death. When a disease is in its final stage and there is no hope of recovery, it seems cruel to me to fill the patient with excessive amounts of food that can only increase his suffering. Chapter 8. Can fasting cure? If generally fasting, even allowing a significant weight loss, does not weaken and in fact facilitates increased strength, can it also be considered beneficial in cases of illness? One of the leading exponents of the field, George S. Wedger, M.D., director and founder of the Wedger Health School at Regents in California, and author of the book The Genesis and Control of Disease, says, the writer takes the side of a growing minority who believe in the efficiency of fasting. The facts bear this out. Nothing is more gratifying than to witness, during relatively short periods of fasting, complete recovery from such diseases as chronic eczema, chronic urticaria, varicose ulcers, gastric and duodenal ulcers, asthma, arthritis, colitis, amoebic dysentery, endocarditis, sinusitis, bronchitis, neuritis Bright's disease, acute and chronic appendicitis, painful facial tics, fistulas, psoriasis, all kinds of digestive disorders, urinary and gallstones, pellagra, glaucoma, breast lumps, epitheliomas, migraines, acidosis, epilepsy, Parkinson's disease, Raynaud's disease, and even locomotor ataxia. Many other diseases could be added to the list that is by no means meant to be limited or represent isolated cases. The conclusions were drawn from group results. Many will exclaim, "This is ridiculous." Others will argue that there is no cure for everything. Still others may deride it under an attitude of false respect. For all those who appear skeptical, I want to state in all seriousness that fasting and a carefully formulated diet represent the best attempt at a cure for everything that is possible to imagine. Profoundly simple and simply profound. Dr. Weber did not believe that fasting could be considered a cure. In fact, in the same way as Dr. Tilden, he did not believe in cures. I can explain his use of the term in this circumstance only by taking into account the fact that a man accustomed to believing in the concept of cure, because of the education he received after years of study and medical practice, falls into the habit of using the term in a general sense rather than in the precise meaning it has assumed in modern terminology. The view of the hygienists, and both Dr. Tilden and Dr. Wedger have abandoned the practices of regular medicine to embrace hygienistics, is that fasting does not constitute a cure in the modern meaning of the terms. Fasting does not cure anything. Fasting is a period of physiological rest. It does not set in motion any mechanism. Rather, it is the interruption of all fatigue. Rest provides an opportunity for the organism to do on its own what it cannot do under conditions of satiety and full activity. The term care comes from the Latin word cura, which meant attention, caution. But the meaning of words is constantly evolving. Biologist A.D. Derbyshire, formerly at the University of Edinburgh, in analyzing the changing meaning of the words in his Introduction to Biology, says, when the adjective curious became detached from its original meaning, cure meant care. Therefore, at first, the term cure meant care for the healthy man. It then assumed the meaning of treatment for the sick, and finally the treatment was replaced by the medicine that was supposed to eradicate the disease. Cure for cough is spoken of and firmly believed in. Today, the word cure can mean a medicine that is efficient in healing an illness, or a safe treatment for an illness or injury of any kind, or even a system for treating diseases. When we say that cures do not exist, we mean that there are no methods or systems of treatment that can restore good health, whether we are talking about an injury or we are talking about a disease. This means that no safe method of treating a disease exists and cannot exist. No type of treatment is capable of restoring good health. But we go even further and say that diseases should not be treated, should not be cured, and that there is no need for the cures. Too often, what is meant by cure is an attempt to return the sick person to good health without removing the causes of the illness. To cure, in modern terminology, means to administer a medicine or perform a ritual, whether mechanical, surgical, or psychological, that, with any luck, succeeds in healing despite constant stresses from the causes of the disease. The continuous search for new cures is the search for suitable means to return the sick person to health by application or administration of a treatment, without feeling the need to eliminate the underlying cause or causes of the damage done to health. An example, we are provided with cortisone, which was used to treat arthritis, the causes of which are openly unknown. Cortisone could not eliminate the unknown cause. The cause was still ignored, yet cortisone was still being administered. The initial improvement in symptoms was enthusiastically attributed to this sure cure. Not too much time had to pass before it was realized that this cure was as illusory as any other. The production of effects can only end permanently if the causes that develop them are removed. But the general tendency is to act as if such effects can be erased forever, without the need to remove the causes that cause them, as if an alcoholic could be cured by allowing him to drink again, or prevent the development of lung cancer, even if the person continues to smoke. It is necessary to learn the simple but fundamental concept that only when the causes are removed can the body, on its own, begin to heal. Removing causes does not mean healing. It only means making it possible for the body's restorative processes to perfect their work. Healing, unlike curing, is a biological process, not an art. A surgeon can join the edges of a wound and sew them together, but he cannot heal the wound itself. He can put the ends of a broken bone back together in such a way that they do not separate again. But it cannot join the two parts of bone together. The welding together of the two parts is a process of life that only the living organism is capable of. Man can neither produce nor imitate the process. Briefly describing the processes by which the body provides for its damage, Dr. Robert R. Gross of Hyde Park, New York says, "We know exactly how the callus that welds the two broken ends of a bone is formed, and the role played by bone cells, osteocytes, the membrane that surrounds the bone, periosteum, fibroblasts, the cells that produce fibrous tissue, and blood capillaries. We know that the interrupted continuity of the skin heals by means of intentions, first and second, by means of the presence of fibroblasts and endothelial cells, embryologic blood vessels, that form a granular tissue capable of connecting the two separate layers of skin, bringing them closer to each other." This technical description of the healing processes of a fractured bone or wound reveals the glaring truth that the healing process carried out by the living organism employs the same mechanism as the production of new tissue, both bone and soft tissue, in the production of skin, muscle, blood vessels, nerves, bone, that is, the whole organism. Healing is achieved by the same processes that initially produce the tissue. To repeat, the production of new tissue, histogenesis, in healing a wound or a fractured bone, follows the same process as the production of tissue in the original evolution of the organism, from fertilized egg to fully developed organism. These processes can neither be produced nor imitated by anyone, not even physicians, however vast their professional expertise may be. The secrets of healing are inherent in the living organism, and no external factor can usurp its prerogatives of self-healing. We can study the processes by which healing is achieved, but we cannot reproduce them. There is the science of healing, but not the art of healing, since art, as such, is distinct from life processes. We are not dealing with the art of physicians, but with the work of the living organism. While admitting that there are many circumstances, mostly wounds and traumatic conditions in which an experienced surgeon could be of invaluable help, it remains tragically true that too often the art of healing consists in interrupting the delicate workings of the machinery of life. Only by fully grasping the significance of the fact that healing is a natural process, and that the processes by which healing is achieved are functions of the living organism as much as the processes of digestion, respiration, excretion, and reproduction, can we understand how so-called cures are ephemeral, but how healing is, instead, an endless process. We can understand why everything can seem to be healing, although there are no cures. This brief description of healing processes should reveal the fact that all healing is, in fact, self-healing, and therefore that fasting is not a cure, in the modern sense of the word. When we say that fasting is not a cure, we mean that it does not heal wounds, it does not weld fractured bones, it does not reform tissues, it does not detoxify poisons, it does not fulfill any of the parts included in healing processes. It does not facilitate the initiation of healing processes or keep them operating. These processes are spontaneous and ready to intervene whenever the need arises. In a sense, however, fasting can be said to be an integral and essential part of the overall healing process. It is part of the restorative process called disease, at least in many life circumstances and conditions. When the organism loses all desire for food and rejects it, it should be understood that forced abstinence is part of the general process by which good health is sought to be restored. As a physiological rest, fasting is only one of the normal conditions for making the body's internal healing processes effective. It provides the body with the opportunity to accomplish its self-healing with less effort. If we advise a sick person to undertake a fast, we do so not with the idea of administering a cure, but with that of providing his body with proper rest. Those who speak of fasting cure, or starvation cure, or therapeutic fasting are only victims of popular beliefs. They do not describe it as a means of protection for the body. Nor should it be considered the cure for rest, which has been done in the past. Rest does not cure. Sick people benefit from rest as much as healthy people do. Rest is one of the natural necessities of life, as essential to the continuation of existence as are food and air, heat and sunshine, exercise and cleanliness. It is no more curative than any of these elements. Can fasting cure? Certainly, according to what has been said, the answer is no. But it is also clear that fasting, if done correctly and under expert guidance, can be a silent ally in the body's healing process. Chapter 9. Fasting. Where and when? Apart from the motivations and purposes for fasting, the question of proper supervision, and other elements about fasting already considered, there are several basic considerations to be discussed here. Where to fast, when and for how long? Although these questions may at first glance appear simple, they encapsulate complex issues that are not as easily answered as one might imagine. Each of them contains arguments that relate to the individual, his or her particular physical condition, and other factors of varying natures. The issue of when to fast, for example, involves not only climatic factors, which in themselves are extremely important, but also the question of how early it can be considered important for the individual to begin fasting. Since fasting decreases resistance to cold, it is generally more pleasant to fast in a warm climate than in a cold one. For this reason, many people argue that it is better to fast in summer. It is also true that Dr. Oswald considered winter to be perfectly suitable for fasting, bringing the example of the hibernating animal to support his point of view. Moreover, waiting for summer could represent a procrastination, during which the patient's condition might worsen. Chronic diseases, with the passage of time, tend to worsen. I believe that fasting should be undertaken at all times of the year as needed and without regard to climate. One should not risk damaging one's health by waiting for climate changes. If a person stays indoors and warm, fasting becomes easy in both summer and winter. Fasting is beneficial at any time of the year, and the general rule should be: fast when you feel the need to do so. If you feel discomfort, it is always best to stop eating until you recover, regardless of the season. There are varying degrees of inability to eat in the different stages of illness, and in all of these, a period of abstinence will serve to hasten recovery. One should not wait until one is in severe pain to establish the necessary restorative measures. Taking care of mild illnesses at the right time and in the right way prevents them from developing into more serious diseases. Unfortunately, it is true, as Dr. Charles E. Page, prominent hygienist and resident of Melrose, Massachusetts, says, almost all patients continue to eat regularly until the food becomes disgusting, often stomach churning. After that, all efforts made to stimulate the appetite become in vain. Moreover, worst of all, after the entire failure of this program, the patient usually gets used to ingesting, often holding their breath, certain substances or extracts. All this tends to aggravate the symptoms, and in the rheumatic patient, to cause the disease to evolve into a chronic form or to develop rheumatic fever. And it should be remembered that the same principle applies to almost all acute disorders. Fasting is a preventive program in that it initiates purification processes before more serious developments occur. It is used successfully in many cases of chronic advanced diseases, but this will be explained later. Certainly, it is wiser to destroy these developments at the root and not wait until the problems have become more serious before intervening. Many of those who are reading this book are in advanced states of disease and wish to know what they can expect from reasonable fasting. Much of this book will be devoted to answering those questions. At this point, I want to emphasize that while fasting can save many lives, it is reasonable to expect it to save all of them, without regard to the condition of the patient at the time he or she undertakes the fast. Dr. Page further states, "In forced feeding, there is no pleasure or nourishment, only pain, poisoning, and starvation. Fasting treatment applied universally and rationally would save thousands of lives each year." In addition, Dr. Page stresses the importance of the spread of fasting by emphasizing the fact that in very serious cases, good nutritious food, as it is commonly called, can kill much faster than it might prove beneficial. The question, when to fast, is answered as follows. When the need arises, as quickly as possible, with due care and under appropriate guidance, without expecting immediate miraculous developments, instant restoration, or overnight slimming down to the proportions of a sylph. We have been accustomed to believe that we can get healthy simply by swallowing pills. That fat accumulated over years will vanish in a few hours. Even in cases of serious diseases, the same lack of realism is observed. The layman is not familiar with the state of deterioration of organs and tissues and expects, even demands, results that are impossible. The same man who took 40 or 50 years to develop the present state of disease, the moment he decides to undertake a fast, is convinced that he can be cured in a few days or weeks. The sooner we can eradicate these false beliefs from our minds, the better we will be able to understand the fact that recovering, which is a reverse process, takes time and perseverance. Often a fast alone is not enough. The chronic patient, after many years, will not only have to persist in the effort to combat the effects of a wrongly led life, but will also have to arm himself with a great deal of patience. But there are also conditions in which fasting of any duration is inadvisable, even impossible. In states of weakness, severe heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and advanced tuberculosis, fasting accomplishes nothing. In cases of liver and pancreatic cancer, it is best avoided. When there is much purity of fasting, it is best not to undertake it. During pregnancy, fasting should be limited to cases of strict necessity. In cases of morning sickness very common in the early stage of pregnancy, fasting for a few days may prove beneficial. Regardless, however, if there is no acute illness present that requires fasting, the pregnant woman should avoid it. Of course, by this I do not mean that she cannot occasionally skip a meal or even fast for a day if she thinks she needs to. Since fasting decreases the amount of milk in the mother, and this is not increased by resuming feeding, the breastfeeding woman should avoid it unless the expert considers it an urgent necessity. It is important that the expectant mother maintain a high level of health during both pregnancy and breastfeeding. A student of hygienistics once semi-seriously stated, "The problem with fasting is that there is no ideal place to practice it. Almost always the environment surrounding the faster is full of difficulties and obstacles. One's home should be the best place, but too often it is not. In part, this is due to the great ignorance surrounding fasting. Moreover, often the home is situated among the noise and rivers of the city, where the water is so treated that it is almost undrinkable. Perhaps with a little effort the city man can manage to obtain pure water, but where can he find pure air? Generally, the biggest obstacle to fasting at home is the almost inevitable opposition of family members toward the practice, regardless of that of neighbors and friends. The person who intends to fast will never be left alone. Everyone will insist and try to get her to eat. They will tell her that she has gone mad, that she will kill herself in this way, that she looks bad, and that even if she does not eventually die, she will remain, however, severely damaged. To succeed in their purpose, they will adopt harsh methods, they will become angry, they will make hysterical scenes. They will become so intrusive and bore her to such an extent that fasting will be almost impossible for her. They will call a doctor to persuade her to stop fasting. They may even go so far as to call the police or threaten to lock her up in a mental institution. They will prepare appetizing dishes for the purpose of tempting her. With their way of doing things, they will turn fasting into a grotesque nightmare. I have often had to take patients from their homes and send them elsewhere to complete the fast. In the opposite situation, when help and cooperation is found at home, fasting becomes pleasant, relaxing, and the results do not take long to manifest. Fasting should be conducted in a calm, serene environment where the air is pure and the water is pure, fresh and uncontaminated, where people are helpful. Since it should always be led by an expert in the field, the best place to practice it is one of those institutions where fasting is practiced regularly. A hygienic institution located in the countryside and run by an experienced person is definitely the ideal place to fast. Fasting does not simply mean abstaining from food for a specific period of time. It also means resting, exposing oneself to the sun, soaking, being surrounded by stillness and peace, and monitoring the patient throughout the duration of the fast until the recovery period following its interruption. All this requires knowledge of the subject and experience. For most people, fasting represents an unusual experience, especially if it is the first time. The fasting person will probably experience anxiety, uncertainty, mental turmoil, and even fear. In addition, the new sensations he feels may disconcert him. For these reasons, the best place to fast is undoubtedly the institution, under the guidance of men who know their stuff about it. How long can one continue fasting? What are the recommended times? There are different points of view in this regard, and much is the discussion on the subject. The ideal answer is that fasting should continue until hunger returns. In reality, however, this is not always possible, and it is not wise to set, however, an arbitrary limit on duration. No one can predetermine how long a fast is necessary in a particular state of the body, nor can anyone determine in advance what the best duration will be to avoid complications later. The experienced person does not recommend fasting with the idea that the patient will then set new records. Fasting is not a competition. The person leading has a specific goal when he advises the patient to fast: to reduce weight, to lower blood pressure, to rejuvenate the individual, to rid the body of accumulated waste, to give rest to a tired nervous system, or for any other reason. He carefully observes the faster and his daily developments, and discontinues the practice when the goal has been reached or when a dangerous situation arises. No living being can go too long without food, but, if conducted within the limits of the organism's constitution, fasting is always safe. Since these limits are well demarcated, the expert is very unlikely to surpass them by pushing beyond the margin of safety. If fasting lasts over time, it will be nature itself that will indicate when it should be broken. Arbitrary limits are justifiable only if the patient has little time available for fasting or for work reasons, or in those cases where it is inadvisable to carry it over time. With the exception of these cases, the only way to conduct a fast is to be followed daily in the developments of the practitioner's physical condition. Following that rule, a fast can last a few days, a few weeks, or months. The longest I have conducted was 90 days. 2 other patients have exceeded 70 days, and many others 60. Such long fasts are not a rule, nor is it possible for every fast to be continued that long. In each case, one must adjust according to the needs and abilities of the individual. The expert who arbitrarily sets a time limit in advance does not help the patient. Setting a limit of 3 days or 1 week or 21 days, as some do, means, in most cases, having to discontinue the fast long before the planned time. But neither should one start with the idea of setting a new record for duration or reaching a determined goal in a few days. The only logical rule is, let developments determine the duration of the fast. In some cases, it is preferable to adopt a series of short fasts rather than a long one. Generally, a fast of long duration produces better results than many short fasts. It is not always possible for a patient to undertake a series of short fasts. The time these require is often too much and the expense is prohibitive. And such a program, unless strictly controlled, can produce damage that never occurs, on the other hand, during a properly conducted fast. Moreover, it must also be taken into account that a program of alternating eating and fasting tends, for the individual, to become very difficult to carry out. It is often the case that periods of abstinence are just long enough for the faster to get used to the process. Each time the patient fasts, he has to go through the same experience. If he never gets to experience the pleasurable stages of fasting, he tends to rebel against it and any subsequent ones. He hesitates, in short, backs off and drags listlessly through its duration. Despite the difficulties present in the series of short fasts, there are cases when this is the only way forward. Then one must act promptly and determinedly, but under expert guidance, if the intended results are to be achieved. The questions of where, when, and how much are the variables to be dealt with and determined wisely. The decision must be flexible, humane, understanding, wise. We are dealing with human beings, not machines. Chapter 10. What you need to know if you are fasting. Whether undertaken for slimming reasons to restore good health, or for some other physical reason, fasting brings developments that should always be carefully examined. Such developments are for the most part mild, especially if the person fasts only to drop weight. I want to clarify one point. I do not think it is possible to overemphasize the fact that the physical sensations caused by fasting are usually more pleasant than the real or illusory pleasures of good food. The patient who, for example, has suffered in the past from being forced to eat without having any desire to do so, might experience a feeling of relief by starting a fast. Whatever the condition of the fasting person when he or she is about to begin abstinence, it remains true that at times this practice can be unpleasant, at least in some stages. It is also true that generally those who fast feel better than when they consumed food. Many people are able to fast for long periods of time, while remaining relaxed and experiencing little or no discomfort. Usually, people attribute all the abnormal feelings, discomfort, and pain that occur during fasting to fasting. This happens even though, as the fasting progresses, the complaints cease. The condition of the individual's tissues is the main cause of the symptoms that occur at the beginning. When these are purified, the ailments disappear. Many of us have heard of the suffering and prostration caused by the alcoholic's rejection symptoms when an attempt is made to turn him away from his habit. In a parallel way, it may happen that those who decide to undertake a fast are so accustomed for years to the use of appetite stimulants that they go through a period of depression similar to that of the alcoholic when deprived of his alcohol. Nausea and vomiting may occur. People may become irritable, sleepless, weak body aches may occur. They may be plagued by severe headaches. It is incorrect to call such developments rejection symptoms. It is important to know that they are evanescent, short-lived, and rarely severe. Sometimes, in an attempt to avoid or improve such symptoms, the fasting person eats fruit. I do not think this is a good solution. With these foods, fasting is discontinued when the complaints first appear and then resumed after 2 or 3 days. Only during a period of considerable duration can fasting be discontinued, alternating it with a light diet. It is doubtful that these short interruptions prevent the faster from the onset of symptoms, while it is certain that they prolong the observation period. If, when symptoms first appear, the faster grits his teeth and continues, they will not recur a second time. Usually the first crisis is short-lived, lasting no more than about an hour. Only rarely does it reach 3 or 4 days. In addition to the above general developments, there are several specific areas where changes often occur. Although these present no problems or difficulties, they should be frankly exposed to the hygienist supervising the fast. When starting a fast, almost inevitably physical developments occur that should not be alarming. Chief among these are: the tongue turns white, the mouth takes on a bad taste, and breath smells unpleasant. The teeth appear doughy. The whole organism follows suit with the tongue, mouth, and breath, and fever develops. However, proponents of fasting liken this to purifying work from an acute illness, a fever. Although such conditions may be unpleasant, they represent a purifying process. As soon as the body discharges its toxic burden, the process of purifying the tongue begins, first at the tip and sides, gradually then moving to the back and middle, until by the time hunger pangs reoccur, the tongue and mouth are clean and the breath pleasant. However clear the urine may be at the time the fasting begins, it will become very dark within a day of beginning. In some cases, it becomes almost black with a very strong odor. After a week or two, depending on the condition of the fasting person, it will begin to lighten, regain its color, lose that foul odor, and by the time the resumption of hunger occurs, it will be back to normal in both color and odor. The whole process stands as a testament to the work of the kidneys, which are busy eliminating a large amount of waste substances. Urinalysis confirms this. As the purification progresses, the urine returns to normal. The weight loss that occurs during a fast is due to the utilization of the body's reserves to feed major tissues and the excretion of toxic accumulations. This loss should be considered part of the purification process. The condition of the tissues makes it easier to determine how quickly weight will drop. Slimming is greatest in the initial stage of fasting. Fat people lose weight faster than thin people. There are, however, lean individuals who, due to the state of tissue intoxication, slim down as fast as obese people in the first few days. The declines at this early stage vary from about 800 grams per day to 2 or 3 pounds per day in very strong individuals. In the final stages of long-term fasting, one is able to lose less than 12 grams per day on average. In fact, after the first few days, the rate of weight loss decreases. In fasting considerations, we easily tend to exaggerate the importance of weight loss. The very thin person who remains so even after several fattening diets may appear reluctant to the idea of losing even more weight, even though generally after fasting, he or she will be able to gain weight with much less food than usually consumed. It is wrong to think that fasting can prove beneficial only to fat people. The feeling of weakness sometimes experienced during a fast is due to functional inactivity. There is a general sense of relaxation as the body tries to take the opportunity to rest that is offered to it. The heart slows its beats, circulation is less rapid, and breathing is slowed. The body's glands reduce their activity. In general, the tired body breathes a sigh of relief and goes to rest. This is what is needed, and the evidence that this is beneficial appears in the return of strength as the organism rests and cleanses itself, long before appetite resumes. In fact, the weakness present during the first few days of fasting is nothing more than the absence of the usual stimulation. Many people undertake fasting, mistakenly thinking that the purification processes that occur during this period are extremely unpleasant in nature. This is true in only a small percentage of cases. It is by no means the rule. On the contrary, many fasters go through long periods of abstinence without the slightest hint of a crisis. Much of the excretory work is done without the production of harmful crises. When a crisis does develop, it should be regarded as a positive sign, since its nature is almost always restorative. Rarely during a fast do rashes occur, but when they do, they too should be considered eliminatory processes. Dizziness, fainting, palpitations, and other symptoms of a similar nature, although uncommon, should not be considered as seizures. They are not a danger to the fasting person. Perhaps the most annoying aspect that occurs during a fast is that represented by nausea and vomiting. It is not only annoying, but also weakens the individual. Fortunately, there is no doubt that such crises are definitely beneficial and do not occur in more than 15% of cases. Nausea and vomiting can occur either on the first day of the fast or at any other time. Typically, the seizure occurs after several days of abstinence. There are few cases in which they occur after 4 or more weeks. The substance emitted is usually composed of a bilious fluid combined with mucus in large quantities. The liver is overworked for 1 or more days, and much of the bile produced is thereby regurgitated in the stomach and then rejected. The faster will be so benefited by such an ordeal that he will be fully compensated for the discomfort caused to him. These episodes may last for a day or two, 3, 4, up to a week. Rarely does the vomiting continue for more than a week. The fasting person's strength returns as soon as the vomiting ceases. If it persists for several days and fluids are not retained, dehydration is inevitable. This is a rather serious issue, especially in cases where vomiting persists. Immediate consideration should be given to discontinuing the fast. The faster is weakened by dehydration and recovery of strength is very slow. If diarrhea also occurs, but this is very rare, the dehydration is even more serious. In such cases, if the vomiting does not cease in reasonable time, the fasting must be stopped. This is not very easy, as there is a tendency to put back both food and water. Checking different fasts, I often had to try different liquids before I could find one that was considered. Diarrhea in fasting is not as common as vomiting, but it does happen sometimes. It can occur at any time during the fast, even after 35 days. The expelled material is composed of bile, mucus, and retained feces. This crisis is undoubtedly purifying in nature. It can be considered in the same perspective as the diarrhea that accompanies the marked edema of nephritis, Bright's disease, in which much of the edemic fluid is expelled from the body. Whether this also occurs among those who do not fast, I cannot say, but dropsy is a very common development in fasting. Chapter 11. 9 Fundamental Points. I want to emphasize the fact that fasting is a much more complicated process than even its most ardent advocates imagine. It involves much more than simply abstaining from eating. There is the art of fasting as well as the science of fasting. The uses of fasting appear, at times, almost unlimited. Its drawbacks are not serious, its dangers few, and almost never serious. Nevertheless, to achieve the most satisfactory results, it must be conducted according to rules and techniques well established by experts. It is not a process to be left to the mercy of anyone without the necessary knowledge and experience in the field. Paradoxically, less control is needed in acute diseases than in chronic ones. When the disease is the result of years and years of wrong living, and if the patient appears in a very weak condition and has various organic damage, great skill will be required to heal such a situation by fasting. In such situations, it is very risky to rely on the guidance of an inexperienced and incompetent person. I am aware that there are many lay people who claim to lead fasts. I am convinced that it is very important to inquire first to be sure that you are meeting an experienced person. In this regard, I would also like to point out that there are several so-called curative schools recognized by law in our country, but few graduates come out of these schools possessing the necessary knowledge and experience on fasting. One cannot choose a doctor by chance without knowing his professional background and elect him to supervise our fasting. It is a fundamental rule of hygienic practice that all physiological needs are present in states of illness. And in periods of abstinence, these must be met according to the degree of need and functional capacity in order to maintain or restore functional and organic integrity. Let us try to understand this more clearly. When we fast, we do not cease breathing or drinking water. There is never an absence of need for oxygen. Thirst continues to occur at intervals, and we satisfy it by drinking. Fasting is abstinence from food, not from the other essentials of life. And it is abstinence from food only in the sense that we abstain from ingesting nutritive matter for a certain period of time while the body replenishes its stores. The need for food is constant, and utilization occurs equally. Fasting does not mean to stop living. In fact, although it is a period of reduced activity, some of the life processes are accelerated during abstinence. The daily necessities of life, food, air, water, warmth, sunshine, physical activity, rest, sleep, cleansing, peace of mind, remain the basic needs even for the fasting organism. Food, nourishment, with which to sustain the body's main tissues, is obtained from the body's internal reserves. Water must be consumed according to the stimuli of thirst. Heat is necessary to keep the body from cooling down. Sunlight is necessary to keep up with reduced metabolic activities, Cleanliness is always essential. Sleep is a necessity. And mental and emotional stability is of special importance. This means that fasting techniques are very important and, at least in a general sense, should be recognized and understood by those interested in the subject or about to embark on a fast. Where do these techniques begin? Some say they should originate long before fasting begins, at the initial stages of fasting preparation. Preparation. To prepare the individual or patient for fasting, many complicated programs have been compiled. Some of these include a particular diet period intended to empty the intestinal tract of all material before fasting begins. Others are rituals of the type of fasting for 1 day, feeding for 2, fasting for 2 days, feeding for 4, and so on in that order, with the purpose of gradually preparing the subject for complete and prolonged fasting. Such programs are a waste of time and money, as they revolve around the idea of feeding when, instead, fasting would be necessary. Since there is no reason why a person cannot undertake a fast suddenly and without rituals, these are not advisable. The real preparation, the fundamental one, lies in mental and emotional habits. If one is able to understand the rationality of fasting, if one is able to clear the mind of all fears surrounding this normal process, then one can fast safely. One must be convinced that fasting will be highly beneficial, and thus get rid of all fears and anxieties. Mental stress and fear make fasting difficult or impossible. Instead, it could be very helpful. When I started my practice, I was for a few months under the direction of Milo A. Crane, a physician who ran Crane Sanitarium in Elmhurst, Illinois. Dr. Crane never subjected a patient to fasting if the patient was afraid of it. Instead, he would put him on a diet and allow him to join the other patients. Typically, after a few days, it was the patient himself who asked to be allowed to start the fast. Here is one of the benefits of being together with others. It serves to realize that other people are not starving. In fact, they are better than before. Fears vanish in the face of reality. Rest. Fasting techniques are based on simple physiological principles. They do not involve the need for or use of measures unrelated to the real needs of the human organism. In fasting, there are no treatments, special modalities, forced procedures. The most important technique is to minimize mental, sensory, and physical activity so that the subject can conserve his or her energy, so that healing and excretion processes can benefit. Those who fast must always keep in mind the simple rule of compensation. In order to consume on one side, nature must conserve on another. What the subject does not consume for a secondary activity can be used in elimination and recovery. Physical rest is provided by ceasing physical activities, staying in bed, relaxing. Physical activities consume a lot of energy and prevent that recovery of strength, which is essential for the restoration of normal nervous energy. Mental rest is ensured by reducing mental activities and emotional stresses. Discussing highly controversial topics is harmful. Getting restless or getting involved in trivial disputes is harmful. Emotional tranquility is the secret of mental rest. It is not always easy for those who fast to stop worrying or overcome anxieties, but efforts should be made to do so. Rest of the senses can be achieved by retreating to a quiet place and avoiding straining the eyes in reading, with television, watching movies, or the like. Noise destroys tranquility and wastes energy. Calm, peace, and sensory inactivity promote energy conservation. Resting, however, does not mean ceasing to live or falling into lethargy or assuming a state of embryonic passivity. What it is meant to do is to avoid stresses, to achieve that physical feeling of peace by which rest is possible. Rest does not heal, but it is one of the essential factors for effective healing and maintenance of good health. It is of immense value to the weak and toxemic. Not tonics or stimulants, not sedatives and tranquilizers, not hypnosis. Only rest is what the organism needs after being exploited to the fullest by the excesses of food, sex, emotional tensions, work, and so many other factors of modern life. Organs rendered powerless by overwork and too much stimulation can, with rest, return to their full vigor. Stimulating them further in any way only serves to exhaust them more. The activity. Those who fast rest during the period of abstinence because in the normal exercise of vital functions, nutrition and activity balance each other out. Some experts allow their subjects long walks and advise them to perform certain physical exercises daily. In slimming fasts, moderate exercise is allowed, of course always under supervision. For other types of fasting, exercise represents an unnecessary consumption of energy and a waste of reserves. Activity should be linked to nutrition. Without food consumption, activities should be kept to a minimum. Rest, not waste, is necessary. The heat. The cold resistance of someone who fasts is probably lower than that of a person who feeds regularly. They get cold easily. Cooling inhibits elimination, increases discomfort, and causes faster utilization of reserves. It is important, therefore, that those who fast are warm. This also applies to the summer months. Feet, in particular, should always be kept warm. Cold feet prevent the fasting person from sleeping. Water. Those who fast will thirst at intervals, less often than those who feed normally. Thirst should be satisfied with the purest water available. Mineral water and strange-tasting water are not advisable. It is always better to use spring water, rainwater, distilled water, filtered water, or any kind of water free of impurities. It should be consumed only according to the stresses of thirst. There is no reason to drink a lot of water, even without feeling the need, just because of the theory that fluids purify the system. It is true that the more water you drink, the more fluids will be excreted by the kidneys, but this does not increase the elimination of waste substances. In fact, it may decrease the amount of material excreted. In the summer months, the desire to drink cold water may present itself. Fresh water is fine, but water from the refrigerator or ice water can slow and delay recovery. In some circumstances, hot water may be more pleasant than cold or room temperature water. In some cases, with the permission of the supervisor, hot water may be moderately sipped. In other cases, its consumption is inadvisable. The dives. The same need for cleansing applies both in fasting and during normal eating. Daily, or whenever deemed necessary, one should bathe. Bathing should be such that it does not cause a great expenditure of energy. To be sure of this, the following rules should be observed. A. Bathing should be of short duration. Those who fast should not stall for too long either in the shower or in the bathtub. The common habit of soaking for long periods of time in water weakens and should be avoided. B. The water in the tub should be lukewarm, neither too hot nor too cold. To endure in hot or cold water, a lot of energy must be expended. The closer the water temperature is to body temperature, the less energy will be wasted. One must always remember that one immerses only for cleansing purposes and not to find the supposed therapeutic effects. Immerse and wash yourself quickly, then get out of the water immediately. C. If the fasting person is too weak to bathe himself, a sponge bath in bed done by an assistant will be sufficient. Sun baths. Sunlight is an essential nutrient factor in the nutrition of both plants and animals and is of great help during a fast. They should not be considered a cure, as they are not, but a normal element of the regular nutritive processes of life. Their role in calcium metabolism is very important, but they are also important in phosphorus utilization and in ensuring muscle strength. In truth, they serve several important purposes in normal life processes and are far more essential than one might imagine. Unless you overdo it, sunbathing causes minimal relaxation and expenditure of energy. If the sun is too hot, if the exposure is too long, if getting to or leaving the solarium is too tiring for the patient, this can cause a waste of energy. In controlling sunbathing, it is necessary to not pull too hard. To do this, the following rules should be observed. Expose yourself to the sun in the early morning hours, when it is still not too hot, or in the late afternoon if it is summer. In a moderate climate, if it is not too hot at noon, sunbathing can be done at any time. Start the exposure with a duration of 5 minutes for the front side of the body and 5 minutes for the back side. On the second day, you can go up to 6 minutes on both sides. Increase the duration by 1 minute each day until you reach a maximum of 30 minutes for each side. It is advisable not to exceed these limits. If the fast exceeds 20 days in duration, reduce the exposure to about 8 minutes on both sides and continue this until the fast is broken. If at any time the sun weakens or irritates the fasting person, the duration of exposure should be reduced. Avoid excesses. The purgatives. It is often argued, erroneously in my opinion, that during a fast, it is necessary to keep the intestines, kidneys, and skin active in order to eliminate the toxins released into the circulation of tissue elimination. It is advised to consume daily purgatives or practice enemas to cleanse the intestines, to drink plenty of water or diuretics to keep the kidneys active, and to take saunas to keep the skin active. All these forced measures are not only useless, they are harmful. There is nothing more than fasting itself that succeeds without harm in increasing the action of the kidneys. During a fast, the intestines empty whenever the need arises. If this does not arise, the intestines rest. The skin is not an eliminatory organ, and saunas serve no purpose. Such measures weaken the jejunum and tend to harden elimination instead of speeding it up. Suffering. It has been said that fasting should be discontinued when the subject is in distress, such as in cases of serious health problems. The fact is that it is precisely under these circumstances that the digestive and assimilative capacities are most reduced. The greater the suffering, the lower the sufferer's ability to ingest and digest food. When the disorder passes, the expert will advise at what time to feed the patient. Fasting tends to make the suffering disappear, and the sufferer will experience relief in a shorter time if he or she continues in the fast rather than breaking it. Chapter 12. Breaking the Fast. It is strange how the following truth, obvious as all truths are, is difficult for most people to comprehend. The ideal time to break the fast is, of course, when appetite returns. When appetite returns, the tongue is cleansed, the breath tastes good, and so is the mouth. These are all indications that the body has completed its work of purification and is ready to return to feeding. Generally, there is salivation in the mouth and a strong desire for food. Does the appetite always return? The correct answer is almost always. In desperate cases, such as advanced cancer, tuberculosis, severe heart disease, and other conditions where death is only a matter of time, the return of appetite rarely occurs. In all recoverable cases, and in normal cases, appetite always returns at the right time. In fact, it frequently returns long before the total consumption of reserves. This is especially true following acute illness. After 1 or 2 days after the disappearance of all acute symptoms, the sick person almost always expresses craving for food, although his body may be amply supplied with reserves to sustain him for further days of abstinence. With the exception of the cases mentioned above, the fasting person suffering from chronic illness presents the same situation. In fact, the difficulties he or she goes through do not consist of lack of appetite, but of controlling the hunger urge when it recurs. After a fast of considerable length, there is always a period of several days, up to 2 weeks, when the person manifests the hunger stimulus at all times of the day. If he can control his eating until the initial period has passed, his appetite will settle down to a normal level and the danger of overeating will be eradicated. If left unchecked, he may get to such eating excesses during this period that he will lose all the benefits gained during fasting. One of the important advantages of conducting fasting in a situation is that control continues until the normal level of eating is reestablished. In such places, the subject's diet is scrupulously examined and followed. He is not allowed to overeat. At home, in order to control himself, he would have to be very self-disciplined, which a normal man can hardly be. For many reasons, most fasts are broken before appetite returns. In a small percentage of cases, those who fast are too weak or too thin to continue the practice to its natural completion. In many cases, There is a lack of time, money, or desire to continue fasting for too long. Some individuals, despite fasting only for health reasons, refuse to become too thin. The majority prefer to stop fasting as soon as the symptoms and complaints are gone. Many believe they can end the recovery started by fasting by adopting a diet. This is wrong, but it is not easy to convince those who are attracted to such a middle way. Very often they regret their decision afterwards. Some people go on a diet during the vacations, thus having limited time to fast, to break the fast, and to prepare to return to work. Others claim to be able to get away from family or work only for a short period of time. There are thousands of personal reasons for ending a fast before it reaches its natural conclusion. In some cases, premature termination comes to be the difference between complete success and partial failure. A job half done is equal to a job not done. Surely your health is worth a few extra efforts. Skipping a few extra meals is small compared to the results it produces. When animals break their fast, the moment they resume feeding, they make use of whatever food is available to them. Animals can be said to be more controlled than humans in general. They do not exhibit the tendency to gorge as soon as they finish a fast, but consume small amounts of food. A dog fasting for a month, for example, will drink little milk at a time, refusing for the first 4 or 5 days after the fast is over, even meat. If human instincts were as wise as those of animals, the need to supervise a fast would not exist. A fast can be broken by any kind of food, including fruits and vegetables. In order not to overconsume, we think it is best to weigh each food for the first few days. Dr. Virginia Vetrano, my excellent assistant for several years, has a great deal of experience in breaking fasts by using any kind of food. According to her, it is better to use such a system instead of just consuming fruit juices or vegetable extracts, as has been previously recommended. If animals in the wild do not possess fruit juices or beverages of such kind, and must break their fasts by making use of food as they find it in nature, why should humans be the exception to the rule? Using her knowledge of physiology, she goes on to say that volume in animals is necessary to initiate both peristalsis and mixed conditions in the stomach and intestines. Volume is also necessary for the secretion of digestive juices in the stomach and intestines. The mass of food touching the stomach and intestinal walls is the stimulus for muscle contractions and proper digestive secretions. Because of this, solid food is digested more effectively than liquids. It is retained in the stomach and intestines for as long as is necessary for proper digestion and assimilation, while liquids, being without volume, are pushed quickly into the digestive tract. Not possessing volume, liquids do not cause strong peristaltic waves and do not, in the same way as solid foods, promote the gastrocolic reflex. This is why, when a fast is ended by making use of liquids, the first bowel movement is delayed. When solid foods are used, bowel movements are resumed more quickly. Chewing is both psychologically and physiologically necessary. Another advantage of breaking the fast with solid foods is that the subject does not become bloated with liquid substances. The volume of food prevents overeating and leaves the subject more satisfied. When fruit or vegetable extracts are used, there is a loss of vitamins and nutrients due to oxidation. The process of squeezing fruit or pureeing vegetables, however brief it may be, takes time, and by the time the drink is ready to be drunk by the faster, oxidation has already occurred. The fast can be interrupted at any time during the day or night, depending on the return of appetite. If this is done before the reappearance of hunger, an arbitrary time can be set at which to act, for example, 8 o'clock in the morning. Numerous techniques have been studied for breaking the fast. In fact, each man who fasts carries out his own preferred program. The main need is the need to consume whole foods, but not too many. Dr. Crane, already mentioned, used to give subjects an orange to end the fast. The famous Henry Lindlawn, a physician sadly deceased, resident of Chicago, and Elmhurst, Illinois, director of the College of Natural Therapeutics in Chicago, used to break fasts with a bag of popcorn. He claimed that popcorn could act as a broom to sweep and clean out the digestive tract. However, they were not harmful. The attention given to fasting breaks is usually proportionate to its length. The following is the method we have adopted. We assume that the fast has continued for more than 14 days. We begin by giving the subject about 2 ounces of whole oranges, weighed without the peel, every 2 hours. This for the first day on which feeding is resumed. Our feeding day begins at 8 o'clock in the morning and ends at 6 o'clock in the evening. Of course, this can only be done when fasting is broken before appetite resumes. When, on the other hand, fasting reaches its natural conclusion, it should be broken at any time of the day regardless of the time. However, even in cases where hunger recurs during the night, at midnight, or during the early morning hours, waiting until 8 o'clock will not be harmful to the subject. On the second day, we give the fasting person 2 ounces of oranges or any type of fresh fruit, weighed without peel, always every 2 hours. In each of these small meals, a different type of fruit can be employed each time. If the subject does not wish to keep to all the times, he or she may skip 1 or 2. But this rarely happens. In fasts interrupted with fruit juices, the phenomenon is more frequent. During this period, there are no mandatory amounts of food to be consumed. On the third day, we switch to feeding 6 ounces of whole oranges or melon for breakfast, 2 or 3 tomatoes, depending on their size, for lunch, and 3 or 4 oranges for dinner. After the third day, it is no longer necessary to weigh the food, as the body is again accustomed to processing it in the correct manner. Also on the third day, instead of oranges, the same amount of grapes or other juicy seasonal fruit may be given. The food given is not as important as avoiding overeating. The fruit should be fresh, well ripened, and chewed well. It is necessary to prevent the faster from consuming his meals too quickly. On the fourth day, we administer a small breakfast consisting of citrus or a couple of other fresh fruits or melon. For lunch, a salad of vegetables without salt, oil, vinegar, lemon, or other seasonings, and a cooked vegetable containing no starch. For dinner, again fruit. Such a meal should be light, but a little larger than breakfast. On the fifth day, another fruit breakfast. For lunch, a salad, 2 cooked green vegetables, and a roasted potato or protein, small amount. For dinner, fruit. For those who are not vegetarians, along with dinner, there is the option of drinking a glass of sour milk, derived from whole milk. On the sixth day, the meals are similar to those on the fifth day, except for the amounts, which are increased. At the end of the first week, the subject should be able to feed normally. Eating between meals or before bedtime is not allowed. 3 meals a day, simple and consisting of fresh foods, constitute the best eating plan after a fast. If later the person wishes to adopt a program based on 2 meals or 1 meal only per day, he or she may do so. But first, he or she must wait until he or she has put on a few pounds again. During the first week of fasting, one should continue to take bed rest and resume activity very slowly. It is easy for the fasting person to want to become active again as soon as he resumes feeding. This is not good for him. At that time, he is not strong and does not possess sufficient stamina. Also, the activity delays the fattening process, if that was the purpose of his fasting. If the fast has been less than 2 weeks, it can be broken with 4 ounces of whole fruit, every 2 hours for the first day, and then adopting the previous program. In breaking a fast of short duration, less caution is required, and activity can be resumed much more quickly. Of course, this applies to those individuals in good health. If the need for more rest or a light diet arises for a certain period of time after the break, the individual should follow the expert's advice. The most important advice for anyone on the verge of breaking a fast is, don't do things too fast. Chapter 13. Does fasting keep you healthy? The miracle of being able to achieve permanent restoration without having to take care of one's health anymore does not exist. Nor is there the weight reduction that allows, then, to eat everything while remaining thin. Attention to the necessities of life, to ensure good health and maintain an appropriate weight, is a constant hygienic responsibility. Everyone has the health they deserve, without miracles. Until you remove the causes that damage health, you will not have spontaneous restoration, and this will be permanent only if you continue to avoid and defeat the causes of disease. To be well, one must live in such a way that one can develop good health. Anything that damages one's health once will be able to undermine it again following restoration. Fasting does not provide the key to the path of perversion. Fasting as a result of goitering makes no sense. The alcoholic cured of his disease, if he returns to drinking, will surely get drunk again. If, however, he ignores alcohol, he cannot get drunk. When a man recognizes his food limits and respects them, he will be in good health. If he continually exceeds them, he will develop diseases, and no vaccine will be able to prevent him from getting sick. A return to coffee and tobacco, to alcohol and alcoholic beverages, to overwork and late hours, to ill-ventilated bedrooms and indolence, to dietary excesses followed by reckless diets. The return, that is, to a life of unhealthy habits, will again produce those physical harms that had disappeared with fasting. The only way to establish and maintain health at high levels is to adopt first-class lifestyle habits. What are the causes of disease? All those mental and physical habits that destroy nervous energy. Any factor or set of factors that produces weakening causes disease? If we distribute our energies in many directions, we will weaken ourselves and initiate the evolution of many diseases. Under such circumstances, damage to the excretory system is inevitable, which causes thus an accumulation of waste substances in the body. It is clear, therefore, that a correct life pattern involves much more than just a change in eating habits. Sex life, emotional life, work life, home life, and all the elements that make up the totality of daily life are each essential to health. Each habit must be ordered and controlled, and must fit the immutable laws that govern the organism. Fasting causes radical purification of the body's fluids and tissues, but it cannot prevent intoxication again following a return to dietary excesses. One can maintain health only by living in such a way as to be able to increase, or, at any rate, preserve the progress achieved. If one cannot return to old habits, what should one eat? Can one at least continue to acquire the same foods as before? In order to respond, it is necessary for me to point out some facts of modern nutrition that affect our civilization. In terms of food, we are going through a period of super-exploitation. Everything is refined, stripped of its main nutritional values, baked, fried, boiled, filled. This, besides being one of the great dangers of our time, is also one of the main problems encountered by those who try to live by feeding themselves naturally. Natural products, sourced directly from nature without having undergone human manipulation, are the source that has proven over time to be essential for humans and animals. Despite the claim that packaged and processed preparations are better than or equal to nature's products, the fact remains that to date no discovery has been made that can equal them. In fact, in all my years of food experience, I have never found a synthetic product that could be considered equal to natural garden produce. Treatments destroy in foods the minerals essential to life and eliminate or render useless most of the valuable vitamins. Enzymes and many amino acids in proteins are also destroyed. Amino acids are destroyed by heat sources. Due to the destruction of nutritive values caused by cooking and the removal of the most essential food factors as a result of alteration processes, it is essential to consume fresh, raw fruits and vegetables daily. In fact, such products should constitute at least 60% of the daily diet. There is no doubt that less protein will be required to meet the body's daily need for amino acids if these are consumed without having undergone cooking. Cooking also has the disadvantage of depriving foods of much of their value. Nutrient is lost in the liquids that escape during the cooking process. It is lost in the water in which foods are boiled. Nutrient value evaporates due to high temperatures, is altered, and consequently rendered unusable. It should be a rule, without exception, to consume fresh fruit and at least a bowl of green salad every day. The salad commonly consumed is of too small a quantity to meet the body's needs and is composed of such substances as mashed potatoes, boiled eggs, pickled olives, and the like, all seasoned with heavy sauces or spices that make it completely unnatural. Some contain 1 or 2 wilted leaves of lettuce, a slice of green tomato, and then the dressing. That would not even be enough to feed a canary. Fresh vegetable salads and fresh fruit meals are essential sources of vitamins and minerals. These foods are essential to human nutrition in the same way that a large amount of green grass is essential to the horse or cow. The person who makes daily use of such foods will not need to add mineral concentrates or vitamin pills to the diet. The properties contained in these foods are the natural source of nourishment, and there is no chemical preparation that can replace them. Minerals are as essential to the formation and maintenance of the body as proteins. They are important for the formation and maintenance of blood, bones, teeth, muscles, glands, and nerves. The body continually needs such substances. Every day, some minerals are used and eliminated, and therefore must be replaced. We cannot, however, supply the body with minerals by eating lime or iron filings. Our body is able to use minerals only if they are present in certain forms. These are the forms prepared by the processes of vegetative life. To replace those eliminated from food in refining processes, the pharmacy cannot supply minerals of the same value, nor can it extract them from powdered eggshells or bone powder. It is from the plant world that the best supply of minerals comes. In nature, protein is found in abundance, and rarely, by consuming natural foods, can one accuse a protein deficiency. Every natural food contains protein. Whatever amino acids are deficient in one protein, they will always be compensated by those found in another. Nuts and peanuts are one of the best sources of protein. Green leaves contain small amounts of the best quality protein. There is protein in bananas, dates, figs, legumes, grains, and hundreds of other foods eaten daily. After a fast, when the body's food reserves have been exhausted, the three food factors most needed are protein, minerals, and vitamins. These are best extracted from the indicated sources. Canned foods, preserved, processed, and altered foods, sulfured fruits, white flour, white sugar, and white rice constitute insufficient substances with which to build tissues. The need for fats and oils is not as great in man as one might think, but a small daily amount is nevertheless necessary, and instinctively man seeks it. In many seeds, such as sunflower seeds, peanuts, soybeans, walnuts, avocados, olives, and other fruits, nature has instilled a large supply of the best oils. One need not go in search of refined oils to provide the body with the fats it needs. In fact, the oils found in natural foods are combined with minerals and vitamins in such a way that they are definitely superior to the processed and refined oils found for sale in supermarkets. This also applies to sugars and starches. In their natural state, these elements appear ideally combined with minerals and vitamins. Syrups and refined sugars are rendered devoid of minerals and vitamins and constitute insufficient foods. Sweet fruits such as dates, figs, raisins, sweet grapes, ripe bananas, persimmons, and the like are the best source of sugars should be eaten as fruits, whole and not broken, squeezed or packaged. In conclusion, any return to the dietary excesses that had characterized the pre-fasting way of life will immediately cause a return to illness. One must learn to be moderate in eating habits. The best way to promote such moderation is to consume whole, natural foods. By living on diets based on refined and altered foods, one is almost forced into excesses. This is because one is trying to ensure that the body is provided with substances that these non-foods lack. Fasting cannot keep you healthy. Good habits can. Chapter 14. Fasting and Rejuvenation. The woman was in her 60s and had long suffered from a minor heart disease. I advised her to fast for 3 weeks. During that period, she remained in bed. At the end of the 3 weeks, she stated, "My heart is very rested. It is so quiet that I almost forget I have it." In the woman's condition, this was a spontaneous and definite improvement. At first obese and with high blood pressure, she lost 10 pounds during the fast, and her blood pressure dropped significantly, relieving her heart of a great burden. A general sense of well-being and vigor was accompanied by improved cardiac conditions. Insomnia had given way to peaceful sleeps. The recovery of bowel function was as marked as that of the heart. Surely the acquired youthfulness in figure and brightness in eyes was the consequence of the rejuvenating effects of his physiological rest. Anyone familiar with fasting will surely have observed similar cases of physical rejuvenation following a period of abstinence. Usually physical improvements occur along with mental ones. The occasional recovery of hearing in ears that had been deaf for years, improvement in eyesight, resulting in the elimination of spectacles, but rarely the recovery of vision in blind subjects, increased acuity in the senses of taste and smell, recovery of the ability to taste delicate flavors, recovery of sensitivity in cases of sensory paralysis, increased vigor and strength, improved mental faculties, weight loss, and an incredible increase in functional strength with markedly improved digestion and bowel action, brighter eyes, general purification and restoration of a youthful appearance, disappearance of some wrinkles in the face, lowering of blood pressure, facilitated cardiac action, prostate reduction, sexual rejuvenation, and others are the proofs of rejuvenation experienced by all those who possess extensive experience in the field of fasting. Fasting can bring real rebirth, a revitalization of the organism. As it progresses, all cells undergo purification and the removal, from the protoplasm of the cells, of accumulated foreign substances, the metaplasmic materials, takes place, so that the cells become rejuvenated and perform their functions more efficiently. Some of these accumulated materials are highly toxic and settle for long periods of time in fat cells and connective tissue cells, referred to as the body's waste ground, as they provide for elimination. Ridding tissues of such materials allows the body to become more efficient as a physiological mechanism. Regardless of the renewal that fasting brings to the organism, it creates a potential that improves its functions and that lasts even after discontinuation. Wear and tear and waste along with replacement and replenishment are almost simultaneous processes in all living structures. One is a process of construction, the other of breakdown. The two processes together are technically referred to as metabolism and are respectively called anabolism, the construction, and catabolism, the breakdown. Catabolism predominates during periods of activity, anabolism during periods of rest and inactivity. Anabolism can be defined as the process by which the body is rebuilt, invigorated, and prepared for renewed activity. It is the dominant process during periods of active growth. With age, this process is slowed down. Fasting has been shown to accelerate metabolism, especially in the period following its discontinuation, anabolism, or constructive phase. In other words, it can be said that the general purification of the organism renews the constructive processes of life. It is true that under experimental conditions, this improvement is not lasting, but this is due in most cases to the error of researchers who allow fasting to be interrupted and conventional life systems to resume immediately. A man's age corresponds to the length of his life. When we use the word age to encompass different aspects of a person's life, the stage of development, physiological age, the mental development achieved, psychological age, or other similar terms that are meant to indicate something other than chronological age, we confuse actual age with physical conditions or stages of growth and development. When we state that a man in his 40s appears old and that one in his 70s is instead young, we are actually referring to the physical and mental states of the men in question, not their ages. Using the terminology functional age when referring to an individual, without referring to his or her date of birth, is also based on the same confusion surrounding the subject. It is true that birth dates do not indicate physical conditions, nor can they determine what degrees and mental developments have been achieved. But conditions are referred to age only casually and are not an essential part of it. A man in his 70s may appear young in his physical and mental appearance, as a man in his 40s may, on the other hand, appear old, flabby, and depressed. The former, however, is always 70 years old and the latter 40. If we recognize such factors, we will be able to ignore the spasmodic quest to turn back the clock. The changes called aging that occur in the body are not so much due to time passing as to causes totally unrelated to it. If aging really occurred as a function of the passage of time, the famous 70-year-old man should show all the signs of withering proper to his age. The fact that these occurrences often happen in reverse should ring alarm bells in the belief that physical conditions irrevocably relate to the number of years passed. It should not be difficult to understand that we age with time, but that time is not the cause of the aging process. Imagine the stone corroded by the sea. It changes over time, but it is not time that consumes it. It is water that corrodes it. The stone's corrosion process occurs over time, but that is not what accounts for the corrosion process. Two stones subject to the same action of the sea corrode at different rates, depending on their respective hardness and intensity. For this same reason, two men, under the same conditions of damaging influences, will also age at different rates, according to the resistance each of them has to the causes of damage. A stone will corrode slower or faster depending on the amount of water that molds it. Corrosion will be slow if the water is in a small amount, faster if the amount is greater. In the same way, a man will age slower or faster depending on the negative influences to which he is subjected. Going beyond our comparison, if we can imagine the stone that after being eroded by the sea manages, if water ceases its action against it, to rebuild itself and reform much of its former substance, we would witness a similar process when this occurs in the human organism, which is self-reconstructing, following the removal of the causes that cause aging. The organism is capable of destroying damaged structures and building new ones. It is able to renew its cells, decrease excess accumulations, and reciprocate and repair many of its woes. Unlike inert stone, the human organism is able to be an active participant in its processes and produce constructive actions. Man can deserve a better and longer life than the present one. He can live for many more years than he currently lives, and he should be able to possess vigor and health. The fact is that, apart from accidental deaths or during wars, men die of disease. If one lived in such a way as to prevent the formation and evolution of disease, one could not only live longer, but could do so in full possession of all physical and mental powers. Aging has been defined as the accumulation of physical changes that increases, with the passage of time, the chances of death. This simply means that aging constitutes the slow accumulation of pathological, disease changes in organs and tissues. It means the accumulation of damage to the structures of the body and the slow damage to the functions of life. Old age is just one more chronic disease. This is the reason why one can grow old earlier or later, and why some men in their 70s appear younger than others in their 40s. Aging occurs over time, but it is not caused by time. It is not important, therefore, to find the means to accurately determine people's physiological age. What is important, however, is discovering and recognizing the causes that trigger the aging process. Remove the causes of aging and physiological age will cure itself. It is asserted that no one knows exactly the physical changes that result in aging or the nature of those changes. Experiments conducted by the famous French scientist, Dr. Alexis Carrel, author of the book Man the Unknown, which consisted of keeping the heart fragments of a chicken alive for many years, revealed that they aged faster when not freed from the waste material contained in their own cells. In other words, they aged as a consequence of the accumulation of their own metabolic wastes in the same place where they were kept. If such waste was eliminated regularly, in a way that did not cause poisoning of the cells, the heart would not age. We have here again the demonstration that aging is the result of chronic toxic saturation. This finding was not given too much consideration, perhaps because there was no way to use it. Carrel's experiments, and many others like them, have led to the conclusion that cells are potentially immortal. They normally continue to divide and redivide, but they never die. From this point of view, death might appear as an abnormal phenomenon. However, what we observe under normal living conditions is that cells actually age and die in large numbers. In order to live indefinitely, all conditions should be favorable. If cells are potentially eternal, as is believed by scientists, and the body as a whole is aging, it is evident that one of two things must be true. Either the functional specialization of cell groups of the organism is inadequate, or there is a lack of coordination of cell groups in the body. Perhaps both. If either or both statements are true, the question appears to be, Are inadequacies of specialization or inadequacies of coordination a primary condition of life, or are they the result of recognizable and eliminable causes? If they are a primary condition, there is no hope of preventing, except to a slight extent, the aging process, which seems to establish itself in most cases rather early in life. If they are due to preventable and eliminable causes, as seems likely, we should be able to prevent aging. At least in many lower forms of life, numerous experiments have shown that the aging process can not only be delayed, but that it can be reversed, resulting in the reestablishment of youthful conditions. For over 15 years, Professor C.M. Child of the University of Chicago conducted research on aging in animals. His results revealed that periodic fasting generally contributes to rejuvenation. In some species of insects, he found that with abundant food, they lived 3 or 4 weeks at most. But when the food was greatly reduced, or when they were fasted, they continued to live for at least 3 years. His conclusion was, partial fasting inhibits senescence. Lack of food brings one back from an advanced age to the beginning of post-embryonic life. It is almost a rebirth. Child emphasized that in the organic world, rejuvenation is generally the regular or ordinary process of cell renewal, in continuous action throughout the life of any organism. The experiments conducted by Professor Child prompted Anton J. Carlson, professor of physiology at the same university, to conduct others on fasting and nutrition in an attempt to determine to what degree rejuvenation could be caused in man, using the same methods that resulted in rejuvenation in lower forms of life. He claimed to have found evidence indicating that fasting could have rejuvenating effects on humans. Unfortunately, his experiments with human subjects were very few and were almost all carried out on young subjects. Frederick Hotzel, conductor of many of the fasts observed by Professor Carlson, argues that the chances of rejuvenation diminish progressively with age, and that after the age of 35 the process is slow and ineffective. On this point, I find myself compelled to intervene. I believe that your statements in this field have been too limited, and therefore, I consider your setting limits to the possibilities of human rejuvenation to be arbitrary. 35 years does not represent a milestone in a man's life. It is not the age at which irreversible tissue changes have occurred. I must acknowledge that there are far more defined limits to the possibilities of rejuvenation in man. Irreversible changes occur in the tissues of the human organism, and to attempt to alter them would be like trying to grow a new leg in place of the amputated one. In many lower forms of animal life, some of which appear too complex, regeneration of new limbs and internal organs, even head, brain, and eyes, is possible, and rejuvenation is far greater in such organisms than in higher forms. But in humans, there is the possibility of rejuvenation, and this is far more evident than is commonly imagined. It can be accepted as true that the greater the amount and level of pathological changes that have occurred in the organism, the lower the chances of rejuvenation. I can agree with Hotzel that the older one is, the lower the chances of youthful renewal. Nevertheless, some of the most striking examples of rejuvenation I have observed have been in men and women over 60 years old. Without the slightest desire to diminish the work done by scientific researchers on fasting, I think I have sufficient authority to say that these observations have been too limited to allow such people to reach a conclusion. However, I do not believe much in the extraordinary possibilities of rejuvenation of men in old age by fasting. The role of reversing the senescence process in younger men, such that the aging process is slowed, represents an equally important role. If we could use fasting to prevent harmful changes in vital organs by periodically ridding the body of toxic substances and providing the organs with more rest, we would be able to slow down aging so that we would not have to worry about rejuvenating the elderly. Some researchers point out the evanescent nature of the rejuvenating effects of fasting and argue that they are not worth the effort expended to achieve them. To this objection, there are 2 points to reply. First, temporary regeneration is all that is needed to remove many structural defects and improve the efficiency of the organism. The removal of toxic material is not evanescent. On the contrary, it is vital for the future of the organism. Second, as stated earlier, these men, in conducting their research, cause the evanescent character of the acquired improvements to appear, immediately returning the subjects employed in the experiments to their previous wrong ways of life. In 1960, Tara Singh undertook a 48-day fast for political reasons. He was 66 years old, and doctors, after examining him, stated that the period of abstinence had extended his lifespan by at least 10 years. The doctor's report, published by New Delhi, also indicated that the period of fasting had rid him of the diseases from which he suffered. While Singh's improved health was only a byproduct of fasting, it is interesting and significant to note the candor of the doctors who had attributed the reported benefits to the period of abstinence. Usually, doctors tend to discredit the benefits obtained from fasting. Perhaps this incident represents a turning point in their attitudes. We hope that doctors will soon recognize fasting as a natural means of rejuvenation, superior to glandular grafts and the use of animal products, which, so far, have not provided great effects. Perhaps this change in attitude may lead to the recognition that whatever rejuvenation an organism is capable of, it must be the product of the operation of intrinsic forces, and not a forced state resulting from impositions. The restoration of health, i.e., purification from pathological states, and rejuvenation can be regarded as one process. Brown-Séquard's seminal fluid was to rejuvenate. Steinach's subcutaneous division of the vas deferens, the duct or tube that carries testicular excretions, was to rejuvenate. Brinkley's monkey gland transplantation was to rejuvenate. Funk's vitamin program was to rejuvenate. Having all failed, perhaps it is time to turn our attention to a more rational approach to dealing with the problems created by aging. If fasting can be recognized as a means of allowing the body to rid itself, not only of toxic substances, but also of the mass of abnormal changes in the tissues, it can be used to achieve great results. Recognizing its limitations and not demanding the impossible, perhaps we can find in fasting not the way for eternal youth, but for a prolonged youthfulness that reaches what we once considered advanced age. Chapter 15. Fasting to gain weight. For most people, considering fasting a means of losing weight is an easy thing to do. Considering it, on the other hand, a way to gain weight is more difficult. However, in many cases, it often happens that, after fasting, one is able to gain weight. Eating excesses resulting in weight loss are daily occurrences. Every day we meet people who, while eating abundantly in an attempt to gain weight, complain that the more they eat, the thinner they get. After trying one fattening diet, they try another, and so on, remaining, however, always thin. The overfed body is often undernourished to the point where, while feeding, it continues to lose weight. Food and nutrition are not synonymous. One is not nourished in proportion to the amount of food ingested, but in proportion to the amount of food one is able to digest and assimilate. If digestion and assimilation are impaired, overeating with the aim of gaining weight will not bring results. Impairment is due to poor health. It is rarely caused by lack of food. Generally, emaciation is proportionate to the degree of damage to health. What such people need is not more food, but a detoxifying system that allows them to digest and assimilate food. If this is done, there will be no more difficulty in gaining weight. Because fasting, among many positive things, causes a rejuvenation of the assimilative system, it often allows chronically underweight patients to succeed in putting on several pounds. Of course, during the fast they will lose weight. But as soon as it is stopped, they will regain more pounds than they had lost during the period of abstinence. This is confirmed by both experience and animal experiments. Experimental fasts have shown that after a period of abstinence, less food is required to maintain physical energy, as fasting produces a more efficient physiological mechanism. This is the reason why the wasting person, who does not gain weight despite various fattening diets, finds that after a period of fasting, he is able to gain weight by consuming less food than before. After long observations, some farmers reported the following. The smallest piglet in a litter, such due to a lack of milk, if it is removed from its mother and fed properly, will grow faster than the others, catch up with them, and surpass them in growth. Osborne, Mendel, and Thompson, three authorities on dietetics and biochemistry, confirmed these observations with a series of experiments. They found that growth provoked after stunting due to insufficient nutrition proceeds more rapidly. A similar phenomenon occurs after fasting in depleted people. The period of physiological rest provided by fasting causes better digestion, assimilation, and consumption of food. Fasting has been shown to increase nitrogen utilization capacity. This facilitates the production of better fat tissue from excess starches, sugars, and fats. To put it simply, this means that the body utilizes protein more readily, thereby producing a different meat than that which it forms, instead, after filling up on sugars, starches, and fats. When the latter type of eating causes weight gain, it is only a few extra grams of unnecessary fat. The tissue produced by protein consumption, besides being very strong and useful, also improves physical appearance. It is important, in the process of weight regain, to adopt appropriate and healthy systems. It is well known that during a fast, the metabolism is accelerated, which means that the body's processing of nutrient matter is definitely more efficient. Metabolism is the term that refers to the set of processes by which food is transformed into tissues and unnecessary substances eliminated. And it is particularly the constructive phase of metabolism, called anabolism, that is accelerated by fasting. An undeniable fact is that after a fast, the tissues appear more receptive to nutrients and assimilate and utilize vitamins, minerals, and proteins more readily. This happens even in those individuals who before fasting presented problems in this regard. In the well-fed, indeed in overfed America, people are rarely found to be emaciated due to poor nutrition. More often, their lack of weight is due to an inability to digest and assimilate the food they consume. These individuals do not need to increase the amounts of food, but to improve their ability to digest and assimilate it. This improvement can only be achieved by acting on the organic and functional impairments that are the causes of their assimilative problems. This can rarely be done if the patient continues to consume his or her daily ration of good, nutritious food. The curious fact is that the majority of these patients will gain weight by eating much less food than they are used to eating. And in particular, they will benefit greatly from fasting of an appropriate duration. Individuals with poor nutrition generally have poor appetites. It is usually thought that their nutrition appears insufficient because they do not eat enough. The opposite is, however, true. Poor nutrition results in a reduced appetite. When food is not utilized by the body, this interrupts the demand for it. Hunger ceases. Nature, under these circumstances, is wiser than man. What is needed is not more food, but more capacity to use it. Fasting sharpens the appetite. Patients, after fasting, not only manifest a greater desire toward food, but also exhibit better digestion and a greater ability to assimilate it. They also gain weight, and in some cases, do so very rapidly. I have often witnessed surprising increases of this kind, and have seen individuals who are constantly underweight gain to such an extent that they then have to reverse the situation and try to drop weight. Exceptions of this kind occur almost entirely in those thin individuals who have always suffered from that disease, generally referred to as nervous exhaustion or nervous collapse. Such people manage to benefit from fasting, but rarely gain weight again immediately. The deep depression of the nervous system and the consequent depression of the functions of the body require, in such patients, a long period of scrupulous control not only of their diet, but also in their general way of life, until they are able to gain weight once and for all. How long should an underweight individual fast to ensure improvement in nutritional processes? There is no absolute answer. Each case is different, as each patient's condition is different. In some cases, a 10-day or 2-week fast may be sufficient. In others, more time will be needed. Rarely, a short fast is sufficient to ensure correction of the defects in nutritional processes that can allow chronically underweight people to gain weight. In this situation, as in all others, fasting must be carried out under competent direction and following the advice of an expert. Since the majority of cases of underweight individuals in our country are due not to an insufficiency of food, but to an inability to digest and assimilate it, it is necessary that the causes responsible for nutritional impairment be identified and removed. If the patient insists on the habits that cause the damage, it cannot be expected that fasting will succeed in improving his body's digestive and assimilatory abilities. A fast is also essential, as it allows the recovery of nervous energy. After fasting, it is unwise to overindulge in those foods considered fattening. On the contrary, good nutrition can be established with a diet consisting of at least 60% fresh fruits and vegetables. Canned vegetables and fruits are not considered good foods with which to break a fast. Protein and carbohydrates in the diet will make up for the remaining 40%. In addition to improving diet, one should make an integral part of each individual's daily life every other hygienic factor that enables one to build and maintain a high level of health. Daily exercise, fresh air, sunbathing if possible, plenty of rest and sleep, emotional tranquility and release from all harmful habits will facilitate the process of weight gain and the production of the best type of tissue. It will have been observed that the present advice is similar to that given to obese individuals who had fasted and wished to build new healthy tissue. The fact is that a normal way of life begets a normal condition. A normal weight has its foundation in good health and better living habits. The natural needs of both types of patients are equivalent. Chapter 16. Can children fast? I am often asked the question whether children and adolescents can fast. Is it dangerous? Should they try it? The answer is that children often instinctively know when and for how long to fast. I want to report the case of an anxious mother who consulted me about her child, who, according to her description, seemed to be perpetually fasting. "My son won't eat," she said. "I have to force him. I have to force him to sit at the table. Force him to eat. Unless I force him, he won't touch food. Why don't you let him stay until he's hungry?" I suggested to her. He is never hungry. He would let himself starve. Many mothers have the same problem with their children. There are few topics more discussed, with more misinformation, than infant feeding. People talk about loss of appetite, about undernutrition, about children being thin, but the fact that a child may suffer from too much food is never questioned. Nevertheless, in 40 years I have never seen a child starve because he or she refused to eat. I have seen hundreds of them survive without food until they were hungry, but I have never seen one who did not demonstrate a need for food within a short time. In the above case, I persuaded the mother to offer her son a chance to go hungry, to see if he would also behave like the others. "Wait," I told her. "When he gets hungry, he will be the first to ask you for food." And so he did. When the food disappeared, and he was no longer forced to eat what he did not want, and what his body did not require, he immediately began to want to eat normally. In a few days we obtained a happy mother and a less unruly boy. She stated, "Now Dick is the first to sit at the table, and there is no need to force him to eat every bite. When the child refuses food, one must leave him alone. It is certain that in a short time he will be hungry again, and will himself ask for food. Abstinence from food is surely the best appetizer available. It is surely better than coercion, which causes nothing but resistance. It is better than tempting children with delicious dishes or delicacies. It is better than administering vitamins or tonics. Let the child go without eating until a natural demand for food arises, and he will be content with little. There will be no need to grab him by the throat. It will not be necessary to add chocolate to his milk, substitute ice cream for normal meals, invent delicacies. Why force a child to eat? If the physiological demand for food does not arise, why force it? When most adults force a child to eat, the food with which they tempt him or her is usually inadequate. It is usually such food that is responsible for the loss of appetite. It is detrimental to the child's character to bribe him by offering him money, a toy, to take him to the movies, or to make up other stories to induce him to eat, despite the fact that his body does not want him to. These gimmicks usually cause overeating. Overeating causes temporary loss of desire for food. Sweets or cookies between meals destroy the desire to eat. Mothers who allow their children to eat between meals should not be surprised if later, They are not hungry when they sit down to eat. Children often have a poor appetite because of the inadequate nature of their diet. McCarrison, who made several studies in the field of dietetics and later delved into the food customs and habits of the Hunza people, says, "It seems to me that loss of appetite is one of the characteristic signs of vitamin deficiency, the first sign of impending disaster. After a short period of abstinence, it should be evident that when the amount of food consumed is reduced, the body's corresponding need for vitamins is also reduced, so the child's diet should be changed. Give them more fruits and vegetables, fresh and raw, and less cereals, bread, potatoes, cookies, sweets, and candy. Eliminate soft drinks. Mothers will no longer have to worry about vitamins for children if they feed them natural foods that contain them." I quote McCarrison again, "There are no more important ingredients than a well-thought-out diet of vegetables and fruits because these foods contain vitamins of every class, recognized and unrecognized. Why give children a baked apple when a raw apple is more nutritious and tastier? Why give them candy made with white sugar, dyes, and synthetic flavorings instead of dates, figs, bananas, and other sweet fruits that are tastier and more wholesome? There is more vitamin value in a stalk of celery or a head of lettuce than in all the vitamin pills sold in pharmacies. An orange or peach will provide healthy nutrition for the baby. A bowl of ice cream is one of the most unnatural things he could eat. Soft drinks are poisonous and unsuitable for ingestion. Greater care in feeding the child will produce better health and save parents much worry and expense. Children's diseases are parents' mistakes. Children will pass the desire to eat if they are sick. Children who are wasting, suffering from gastritis, tonsils and adenoids, diarrhea, feverish, will not ask for food. They should be allowed to skip one or more meals, depending on the circumstances, and no attempt should be made to force them to eat. A very unusual state of excitement, even a picnic or outing, can cause so much energy waste that indigestion is produced. Symptoms of indigestion can range from irritability, insomnia, being restless during sleep, bad breath, growing pains, white spots around the mouth, fever, stomach pains, nausea, vomiting, and other complaints, highlighted in the extreme by constant insomnia. When such symptoms occur, no food should be given. If children presenting with indigestion are fed in the traditional manner, the state of their stomach and intestinal tract will probably become putrescent, paving the way for possible more serious illnesses. Children become debilitated if they are picked up too many times, scrambled if their sleep is interrupted, if they are annoyed by noises including household discussions, if they are overpampered, excited by games, exposed to too high hot or cold temperatures, overfed, given medications at the first symptoms of illness, and overused preventive vaccinations. As far as the child is concerned, therefore, a competent hygienist should be followed as a guide. When the child is debilitated, the digestive function is affected. This results in indigestion with subsequent fermentation and decomposition of food. The putrescent substance that forms irritates the membrane lining the stomach and intestines. The membrane of the stomach, intestines, and the channel that allows the passage of air becomes the site of additional excretion, and the process of elimination, depending on the part that is affected, can manifest itself in colds, bronchitis, gastritis, diarrhea, etc. Light fevers and mild coughs may appear along with the stomach ache. The child is agitated and anxious, sleepless and irritable. This agitated state may be interpreted as a symptom of appetite to the point that feeding is deemed necessary. If feeding is immediately discontinued, indigestion quickly ceases. Insomnia and agitation decrease. If, on the other hand, the child is fed and scrambled, such as when parents walk around the house holding sick children, irritability, agitation, and feverish state increase. Vomiting and diarrhea may appear if this is done, and the set of symptoms is called enteritis, cholera infantum, colitis, or dysentery. If the lungs are selected as the organs through which excess toxins are excreted, the set of symptoms is termed pneumonia. If rashes appear, the disease will be identified as urticaria, measles, smallpox, or scarlet fever. During childhood, Dr. Oswald wrote, Chronic dyspepsia is almost always determined by morbid dietary, constitutional, thermal, and hygienic factors. Indigestion is not hereditary. A sin of gluttony, a binge of sweets and pastries, can mess up the digestive process for a short period of time, but the ailments pass soon after the holidays. Lock the sweets in the cupboard, administer a nice glass of cool water, and I assure you that on Monday morning, the little glutton will be ready to climb the stairs to his school in perfect shape. Fill him with liver extract pills, flood him with cough syrups, palliatives, and within a month or two, he will no longer be able to perform the proper functions of a boy without the assistance of stimulants. Infants and children, as a result of severe indigestion, exhibit spasms. Each paroxysm terrifies parents, although it is common for a boy to be sick one day and perfectly normal the next. As soon as the child recovers from indigestion, the spasms cease. A child with indigestion should not be fed. Sometimes older children suffering from mild febrile states and inflammation of the digestive tract may think they are hungry and ask for food. Such a request should fall on deaf ears. Food would only serve to increase discomfort and delay recovery. Almost always hunger is not genuine, but is a mental condition. Gastritis is inflammation of the stomach. It can be caused by overeating or poor nutrition. When a child is debilitated as a result of too much excitement, too much scrambling, exposure to too much heat or too much cold, or other similar circumstances, an inhibition of the excretory system is caused, and an additional elimination channel is formed through which toxins accumulated can be expelled. The mucous membranes of the body represent the most common channels through which fontanelles, openings to be used in the expulsion of excretions, are formed to serve for elimination. If, for example, as a result of local irritation due to overeating or faulty nutrition, the stomach membrane has to perform other tasks besides its natural one, the child will manifest gastritis or indigestion. If it is the membrane of the intestine or colon that has to do additional work, diarrhea will occur. In some cases, a week or so before the onset of fever, the mother may notice white specks in her baby's stool. This means that the milk is not being digested, probably due to overeating. Such speckles may take the form of small white clusters scattered in the stool, but they may also reach 2/3 to 3/4 of the stool. If the stools are gray and hard, they are composed mostly of undigested curdled milk. If they are acidic, this is an indication of fermentation. If action is taken at this time to remedy the situation, there will be no further development. But if you stall, you will have inflammation of the stomach and intestines. If indigestion is limited to the stomach, the child will be irritable, feverish, and anxious. At first, he will reject any ingested food. At a later stage, he will reject a liquid substance mixed with mucus, sometimes with a slight yellow coloration. If instead of food, he is given water in small doses, the crisis will pass in 2 or 3 days. Often, children are thirsty under such circumstances, and mothers mistakenly confuse this desire with appetite by urging them to eat. Food will be rejected. Sometimes even water will not be retained. When water is given, it should be lukewarm and drunk in small amounts. It is important for mothers to know when to refrain from feeding a sick child. In diseases of the stomach and intestines, feeding should always be suspended. In conclusion, even following the most correct hygienic practices, as far as children are concerned, one should let the natural systems of rest, peace, and tranquility restore health in the sick child, even if it is only a matter of wanting to eat or not. There are circumstances in which the instinctive wisdom of a child is far greater than that of an adult. Chapter 17. Fasting in Acute Diseases. "My daughter is dying," were the words spoken by a mother to a hygienist over the telephone. It was the winter of 1927. The hygienist was in the city of New York. The mother was calling from Nyack, New York State. "How do you know your daughter is dying?" The mother's response was not encouraging. "She has pneumonia. 5 doctors just met in consultation. Their verdict is that my baby will die. There is nothing more science can do." "Let them talk," the hygienist said. we can still try to save her." And again by telephone he added, "The first thing you must do is to go to your daughter's room. Take all the bottles and boxes of medicine from the bedside table and throw them in the garbage. After that, open the window and let some fresh air into the room. Keep the child warm, but let her breathe fresh air. Give her all the water she wants, but no food and no medicine." 20 years later, the same little girl, who had become a beautiful woman, was married, and the photographs of her wedding represent a trophy for the hygienist who had won the battle after the doctors had declared defeat. It is not uncommon to see patients recover after science has declared that there is nothing more to be done. This happens in that often the interventions of science are the causes of death. Sometimes, in cases of pneumonia, medicines to suppress the cough and palliatives to relieve chest pain cause death. In such cases, feeding is also dangerous. When, in cases of pleurisy and pneumonia, the patient is fed, not only is there a high level of toxemia, but the solution to the problem is prevented. That is, the inflamed lungs or pleura are prevented from returning to normal condition. In acute forms of illness, fevers and inflammation, the desire for food is absent, indicating, therefore, to the affected person what he or she should do. Abstain from it. There is an absence of digestive juices. Perhaps the walls of the digestive system secrete mucus in large quantities, as is the case in acute gastritis or typhoid fevers, just in the same way as the lining membranes of the nose and throat during colds. Normal muscular movements of the digestive tract are suspended, and the ability to digest food is absent. Inflammation, pain, and fever block digestive secretions and stomach movements. If those suffering from acute illness are fed, their pain and discomfort increase, their temperature rises, and their chances of recovery appear reduced. In acute illness, the digestive system appears as unfit for digesting food, as the legs are for transportation. Both need rest. For what purpose should a man ingest food if he finds himself unable to digest and assimilate it? Restless, suffering from nausea, with no desire for food, and unable to retain it when he ingests it, he certainly should not make use of it. Forced feeding under such circumstances is not nutritious, but harmful. Fasting is the only rational method of curing a sick person who accuses such symptoms. The man is prostrate. Everything tastes bad to him. Every little noise is torture. His mind wanders. His tongue is covered with a brown-yellow layer. The part of his stomach and intestines is sensitive. He vomits at short intervals. His temperature is above normal levels. Should he be fed? Could he be fed without it causing more discomfort and danger? Loss of desire for food is one of the first symptoms of acute illness. Analyzing the diseases one by one: smallpox, typhoid fever, pneumonia, diphtheria, typhoid fever, measles, cholera, one realizes that one of the first developments in these situations is the suspension of all desire for food. Very wisely, nature eliminates all desire for food when it cannot be used. Fasting is one way to overcome such crises. Fasting is a temporary expedient by which the body performs some of the most urgent tasks, an expedient employed to deal with life's many emergencies. We are not wrong in asserting that fasting and surgery are the most effective remedies in diseases. But we can affirm this only if we recognize the fact that the ordinary elements of the natural hygienic plan are as essential in health as in disease, but the use made of these must be modified in accordance with the problems of the organism. Fasting is not a cure. It is an essential and integral part of the healing process. When the digestive system is prostrated and all desire for food is absent, as is the case in acute illness, the body presents an expedient that is as much a part of the recovery process, the process of reestablishment, as the general prostration of the organism that drives the sick person to stay in bed. To be more precise, fasting is a real part of the recovery process we call illness. To include surgery among the most useful expedients for curing disease is not to endorse all the surgical operations that are conducted nowadays. Even if performed excellently, surgeries are often recommended for purely commercial reasons and not out of necessity. Perhaps one day everyone will know that fasting can obviate the need for surgery in many cases. In stating that surgery is often practiced for no good reason, I am merely associating myself with the opinion of many experienced surgeons. In the natural world, the lack of desire for food is dutifully respected. The sick dog hides. It does not eat. It does not need wet patches on its forehead. It does not complain or seek sympathy. It does not seek comfort from its friends. What it needs is to be left alone. He does not need food, so he does not eat. Rest, peace, warmth, air, and sometimes water are his needs. He does not need to drink juice or stretched milk. If offered vitamins, he would reject them. By remaining secluded, possibly in a dark place, and waiting for the completion of the work done by the self-healing powers within him, he restores himself. There is an order in the process of nature. Chance never reigns supreme. There must, therefore, be profound reasons to justify the suspension of digestive processes and the simultaneous loss of appetite in acute disease states. The repulsion of the sick person toward food should be considered as important as that toward noise, movement, light, stale air, and cold. In spite of this, the other repulsions are commonly respected, except the first, and there is a tendency to persevere in feeding, in spite of the most stubborn repugnance to food. If the patient is cold, we keep him warm. If noise bothers him, we create a quiet environment for him. If light bothers him, we lower the curtains. If the air is heavy, we open the windows. We respect his desire to want to lie quietly without having to move, but we insist on feeding him. There is a story about Pope Leo XIII who, at the age of 93 in his last illness, told the doctors treating him, "Gentlemen, you are advising me to eat more now than when I was well. This habit is still too widespread and is the cause of much unnecessary suffering and deaths that could be avoided." In acute illnesses, abstaining from food not only relieves pain, but rests the heart and lightens the work on the kidneys. Ancient peoples well understood the value of abstaining from food in cases of acute illness and passed this knowledge on to later generations. More than 150 years ago, fasting was employed by Neapolitan physicians to treat febrile states. These often allowed their patients suffering from fever to abstain from food for long periods, sometimes up to 40 days. One should not, however, think that fasting should be undertaken only in cases of serious illness, that a person can continue to eat until he or she possesses digestive capacity. On the contrary, skipping a few meals at the onset of symptoms is often sufficient to prevent the development of more serious disease. If the functional impairment appears slight, as is indicated, for example, by a stained tongue, headache, general malaise, and other insignificant symptoms, a short fast will allow the body to clear toxemia from the system before the situation develops more seriously. If at the appearance of the first symptoms the patient were put to bed, on absolute rest without food, many cases of acute illness would not become severe and would be resolvable in a short time. The patient should be kept warm and given as much water as he desires. The room should be airy and lighted. Visitors should be excluded. Rest is the important thing. When those suffering from acute illness fast, complaints diminish, aches and pains fade. Fever does not reach high temperatures. Complications are rare. Weight loss is less than in patients who do not fast, and the duration of illness is shortened. The lower weight loss is due almost entirely to the fact that the duration of the illness is short. Typhoid fever, for example, typically lasts 8 to 12 days instead of the usual 21 days. The course of measles, scarlet fever, and pneumonia is also shortened. Again, I affirm, fasting is not a cure. However, if conducted carefully, the physiological rest it provides to the body's organs can help nature's recuperative forces do their healing work. Chapter 18. Fasting in Chronic Diseases. I lost my appetite. No flavor is good for me. I eat only as a matter of habit. After every meal, I experience discomfort. These are just some of the complaints of patients suffering from such forms of chronic diseases as colitis, chronic gastritis, hay fever, asthma, arthritis, neurosis, cancer, or stomach ulcer. Such patients eat regularly, 3 times a day, just because they are convinced that they have to, in order to survive. Some are obese, but many are thin and remain so even if they overeat. Another class of chronically ill, as they call themselves, they are always hungry. They eat at all hours of the day and night. They eat excessive amounts of food, altering the taste with condiments, strong flavors, and in many other ways. They often show discomfort after each meal, but do not decrease the quantities. Then, there are some among them who suffer both if they eat and if they do not. Hunger in these cases and many others is not hunger in the true sense of the word, but is a morbid sensation or a set of sensations mistakenly considered as such. It could be a feeling of stomach bites, pains, or other symptoms due to gastric irritation. That is why such a sensation can never be satisfied. The fact that eating relieves discomfort for short periods of time does not mean that a need for food actually existed. A cup of coffee is not a cure for a headache, even if to those who use it extensively, this happens temporarily. The easiest and safest way for those who are always hungry to overcome such a feeling is to fast. Humans tend to abstain from food consumption when they are in situations of great emotional stress. Food refusal is very common among those with mental disorders. Although it is common to force these patients to eat, I do not think such forcing is right. Humans instinctively fast, like lower animals, under certain circumstances, and the refusal of food for the mentally ill is probably also an instinctive act that, if unbroken, may prove beneficial. Indeed, my experience with such patients has shown me that this is true. The most important feature of fasting in chronic diseases is a significant acceleration of excretory processes, which quickly rid the body of accumulations of toxic substances. The disappearance of symptoms, sometimes after years, while fasting is often dramatic. Fasting provides an opportunity for the body to do on its own the work it could not do in a state of satiety. The state of satiety makes fluid and tissue purification impossible. Carefully conducted fasting will enable the chronically ill body to expel the toxic accumulations that are the cause of the disorder. A proper way of life will subsequently enable the individual to build excellent health. One should not believe in continuing to eat until the body vigorously rebels. When there is functional impairment, symptoms of disease, discomfort, and listlessness, then it is time to undertake what can be called preventive fasting. In such cases, fasting does not have to be protracted for long. Improvement is often rapid and prevents the development of serious disease. When we notice that our eyes appear brighter, our skin smoother, our breath better, or when we notice a better physical appearance, we can be sure that fasting has allowed the body to accomplish preventive purification. It is a mistake to think that fasting, however long it may be, is sufficient to rid the body of all accumulated toxins. A life spent accumulating toxins cannot be healed within a few weeks. In diseases such as Parkinson's disease, arthritis, widespread cancer, and other conditions that take a long time to develop, 3 or more fasts are often necessary to achieve improvements. Sinusitis is the inflammation of the nasal cavities. Our parents would have called it a phlegm formation, but the current trend is to abandon the use of general terminology such as the word phlegm and to adopt more specific terms. Sinusitis can be acute or chronic. Many individuals present with inflammation in one or more parts of the mucous membranes of the bodies, as if they had one or more catarrhal inflammations. The definition catarrhal inflammation varies according to the part affected, but the disorder is the same, and so is the general cause. The habit of classifying each local inflammation by a different name confuses both the patient and the physician. This serves to fuel the idea that there are many diseases. Responding to those who claimed that fasting decreases resistance to disease, Dr. Wedger says, "I have seen many cases of infections of different nature heal completely during a fast. For example, an advanced case of sinusitis that after 5 or 6 painful operations, frontal ethmoidal of the antrum, after a treatment consisting of inhalations 2 or 3 times a week, lasted for a period of 2 to 5 years, without any improvement in symptoms. Generally, after much suffering, such patients appear thin and depressed physically and mentally. When during a fast they recover completely, as is the case in most cases, is this not sufficient evidence to say that fasting in one way or another increases the body's ability to overcome infections? The point made about sinusitis also applies to other types of infections, such as those located in parts where it would be impossible to intervene surgically. The restoration of sinusitis previously described happens equally in other cases of inflammation of the respiratory tract, digestive system, genitourinary system, and those parts of the body lined by mucous membranes. Thus, otitis, conjunctivitis, gastritis, duodenitis, colitis, etc., heal during the course of prolonged fasting. Only in relatively rare cases has it been necessary to resort to two fasts. Hay fever and asthma, both of which belong to the same class of diseases, are eradicated by the powers of the body that are strengthened during fasting. The vast experience that has seen hundreds and hundreds of people fasting over a period of more than 130 years, and involving the work of men concerned about their fellow human beings, has shown that when the digestive system is relieved of its work, all the body's energies are transferred to the excretory organs, allowing them to be fully utilized to rid the body of toxic accumulations. What the body is able to do on its own by restoring normal functions when toxic accumulations have been eliminated is an event to be respected and held in high regard. Speaking of cases of pernicious anemia, Tilden states, "A fast of 2 weeks, in which nothing else is consumed but water, will improve the state of the disease, increasing during that period the blood corpuscles up to a number of 5,000. In such cases, poisoning of the digestive tract takes place, and it seems that such contamination of the blood with consequent infection is the cause of the inability to restore organ function. Such infectious contamination also seems to occur in cases of cancer, causing anemia. It must, however, be remembered that anyone suffering from anemia should never undertake fasting unless they do so under the guidance of an expert. And equally, even in cases of diabetes, expert supervision should be used. The diabetic person can fast without danger, particularly if he or she has problems with excess weight. If one has been using insulin for long periods of time, then fasting is not advisable. Those suffering from Bright's disease can also fast without danger. In both these situations, and in all similar diseases, more important than fasting is to totally correct the modus vivendi. It is essential that these patients be taught the proper way of eating, and that they recognize and respect their own limitations. They will be able to develop good health only by breaking all unhealthy habits and learning the laws that underlie right nutrition. Chapter 19. The Case of the Common Cold. Millions of dollars have been spent over time to find out which germ or set of germs causes colds. All efforts to date have only served to create confusion about the remedies and vaccines to be used in an attempt to prevent it. Harold Days, a physician at the University of Minnesota, experimented on many thousands of students with every possible cold remedy, and then elaborated on the results obtained. No remedy proved suitable. Some experts in the field claim that colds are caused by a panoply of microbes, akin to seed cocktail. Others claim that it is a virus or a series of viruses that triggers the effects. About 100 viruses have been identified that could play a role in causing colds. Since current efforts all seem to converge in an attempt to discover a vaccine to immunize individuals against such viruses, it is obvious that many of these vaccines will have to be refined. It would be better to learn to live in such a way as to avoid the occurrence of colds. The normal organism develops its own protective system. It does not need help from outside. It has been said that colds are widespread, not because it is a simple phenomenon, but precisely because it is complex. This may be an example of the confusion surrounding the etiology of the cold. Dr. Tilden argues that the cold is the proximal symptom of a complex, the distal symptom of which is cancer or tuberculosis or any fatal degenerative disease. Between the first colds of childhood and death from cancer in middle age, there is a whole range of intermediate symptoms and complexes: colds, coughs, sore throats, constipation, diarrhea, headaches, fatigue, irritability, apprehension, restlessness, insomnia, bad breath, a pathinous tongue, and many other symptoms and so-called acute diseases, all of which are toxemic crises. The non-toxemic subject can never develop the symptoms of a cold. Not only can colds be avoided by learning to feed oneself according to one's limits and conserving by all means one's energy, but by fasting one can get rid of a cold. Filling the cold patient to fullness only serves to prolong its course and make it degenerate into pneumonia or something similar. Few people understand the importance of stopping feeding until the symptoms have disappeared. In an article on the common cold published in an American journal in December of 1962, Dr. Walter C. Alvarez, M.D. and editor of the journal American Medicine, as well as a writer of articles, stated, "In the English Cold Research Laboratory, it was found that walking around wet even though it is cold does not serve to cause a cold. Such experiments are but a repetition of those conducted by hygienists in this country over the past century, and while they confirm the conclusions they arrived at, they add nothing new to the knowledge already gained." Alvarez himself states that he is not afraid to get colds during cold seasons. He claims that colds are contagious. What he is afraid of is getting into a cab with a cold man. He thinks he can catch a cold, or that this can catch him under any circumstances. "Since experiences of this kind never make me catch a cold, I wonder why." He, instead, immediately presents symptoms of it when exposed to such conditions. He takes for granted the idea that being in good condition allows the subject to avoid colds, but his arguments on the matter are rather weak. In his youth, he used to get 4 colds a year at the time when he was an athlete. He ran, swam, and was a gymnastics instructor despite the fact that every morning he bathed in cold water, and every evening he ran 3 or 4 miles. At the expense of his claims, it must be said that his activities did not necessarily prove that he was in good physical condition. The frequency of athletes' colds is notorious. Alvarez adopted an erroneous way of reasoning, by the way very common, regarding what it means to be in good condition. There are those who claim that a toxemic and plethoric individual can be in good condition. Alvarez states, "We are told to eat well and get plenty of sleep." He does not agree with or question such advice. I would like to point out for a moment that usually, eating well means overindulging in food consumption. This is the sure way to catch a cold, not to avoid it. However, I do not rule out the possibility that exposure to intense cold can contribute in the production of colds, just as on the other hand, I do not reject the idea that overheating to excessive levels can equally trigger the symptoms. Prolonged exposure to cold debilitates, and this halts elimination. Already debilitated and toxemic individuals, when exposed to cold temperatures, exhibit further decreased elimination, and usually this is sufficient to trigger a crisis, in this case, a cold. It should be clear that if one is already debilitated and toxemic, any additional debilitating factor will further halt elimination, definitely triggering a crisis. What happens is simple. The additional impediment caused to the excretory system causes toxic accumulations to increase to the limit of tolerance, resulting in rebellion by the body. An additional channel of elimination through which to get rid of excesses is, therefore, established. Copairin, the medicine considered best by Alvarez, was the only one, according to Days, that was efficient. That medicine, containing codeine, seemed to block 85% of colds, but it took action only when ingested in the early stages. In later stages, it failed to cure. This is evidenced by the fact that many of the blockages attributed to the drug would have occurred even without its help. Colds can last from a few hours to 2 or 3 weeks. Anything can appear to be curative, since reestablishment is spontaneous anyway and would happen anyway. Copairin causes constipation and nervous trouble for those already suffering from such ailments. It does not remove the real cause of the cold. What should be done at the first onset of cold symptoms? Immediately stop eating. Drink water not in large quantities, as is generally recommended, but only according to thirst urges. In truth, it seems that the smaller the amount of water, the faster the recovery. Fasting should not last less than 24 hours, perhaps 2 or 3 days depending on the severity of symptoms. After fasting for the first few days, the diet should be light. Oranges and grapefruit, no sugar for breakfast, a green salad for lunch, and fresh seasonal fruit for dinner. After the first 2 or 3 days, the diet should continue to be light until all symptoms are gone. During fasting, the best place for the patient is in bed. He should be comfortable and warm and have, in the room, good ventilation both during the day and night. A lukewarm bath can be taken, neither too hot nor too cold. If it is not possible to stop working to go to bed, one should rest as much as possible and go to bed early in the evening. By following such advice, a cold will never turn into pneumonia. Prolonging a cold by continuing to eat and nullifying the symptoms with medicine can result in death. Fasting does not cure a cold. It can also be cured by eating abundantly, drinking in large quantities, working non-stop, and exposing oneself to the cold. Many people succeed and have always succeeded. What fasting can do is alleviate the discomfort of the cold, shorten its duration, and leave the patient in a much better condition. Conclusion. What I wanted to state in this book is that the organism possesses the ability to self-heal, if given the chance to do so. Fasting is a way to purify the physique and to rest the organs, which are often overcrowded by our lifestyle habits, especially our eating habits. I have stated that it is wise to fast, to rest, to live quietly, to establish healthy living habits. That it is wise to recognize the toxic effects caused by excessive eating, emotional stress, alcohol abuse. That it is wise, therefore, to avoid the poisons that too many of us habitually put into our bodies, into our minds. This book contains no medical principles, nor does it claim that fasting is a cure. Fasting is just a way of resting the body, this complex and tremendous organism, and giving it the opportunity to accomplish on its own the return to health, without stress or interruption, in absolute calm and peace. How should we live? Herbert M. Shelton posed this question in his great work, Human Life, Its Philosophies and Laws, 1928. The following is taken from his answer. 1. Cultivate balance and courage. Don't strive to see the world through a rose-colored lens. Learn instead to take joy and sorrow, good luck and bad luck, with the exact same common balance. 2. Practice daily. Exercise daily in the fresh air and sunshine, and as often as possible some form of play. 3. Ensure plenty of rest and sleep every day. Learn to go to bed early at night. 4. Keep clean. This applies to both body and mind. 5. Breathe pure air. Keep your windows open and go outside as often as you can. 6. Make sure you get as much sun as you can. Your naked body, or as much as circumstances allow, should be exposed to direct sunlight in the morning or late afternoon when it is not excessively hot. 7. Eat healthy foods moderately. 8. Be moderate in your dressing. The less clothes one wears, the healthier one will be. 9. Create an interest in life. A life without interest leads to an untimely death. 10. Married. Create a home for yourself. Form a family. 11. Avoid all bad habits. 12. Avoid all sexual excesses. 13. Avoid all kinds of excess. Build your life on the preservation of energy, not its dissipation. Don't waste your energy on useless and purposeless things. 14. Don't become one-sided in your way of life. You absolutely cannot become strong or stay strong through exercise, diet, rest, or sleep alone. Pure air and sunshine by themselves are not enough. Don't think that only through proper breathing can you reach your peak. All these things are good, but life is more so than exercise, food, or drink, more than thought, rest, or sleep. It is all these things and more. Life must be lived in its integrity. Don't think that you are an exception to the laws of life. There are no exceptions. Herbert M. Shelton. This recording of Fasting Can Save Your Life by Herbert M. Shelton was presented by Stargate Book. Sound recording copyright 2023 and produced by Deep Send Limited 2023.